The white wind rolled off the black water like a living thing, a cold serpent slithering above the tide-smooth stones and shivering through half-shuttered alleys. It seeped beneath doorframes, coiled around ankles, found every crack in every wall of King's Landing to whisper its secrets. Winter is here. It had been 2 days since the first snow fell upon the capital in living memory, but the city still stared skyward in wonder or dread every time another flake drifted through the smoke. Fires burned low, wood was scarce, charcoal scarcer, and even the poorest beggars huddled together for warmth they hardly shared. Beside the mud gate, fishermen watched ice cling to their nets, bewildered that the river they'd known since birth could crust over in a single night. The Red Keep loomed above them all, its crimson stone muted beneath a white shroud, and from its highest tower Cersei Lannister studied her kingdom's new color with an unsteady heart. The queen's black velvet gown rustled as she pressed a gloved palm to the window. Frost blossomed where her warmth met the glass, a petal of silver furrowing outward. She did not shiver. Cersei did not yield to anything, least of all the weather. But her blood felt sluggish, every pulse slowed by the chill that had stolen into the marrow of her bone. In the hearth behind her, the endirons glowed only dully. The flames should have roared, yet the wood hissed as though strangled, producing more smoke than heat. The maesters prattled about unnatural cold, about storms turned south by gods or monsters, yet gave no remedy. Cersei licked her lips, tasting bitterness. She had sent ravens to Storm's End, to Dragonstone, even to Old Town pressing High Tower to explain, but none returned. Ravens vanished in the white skies, swallowed by silence. Qyburn stood at her side, the lines of his face etched deeper by candlelight. "Your Grace, the grain stores remain adequate. If snow does not deepen, we can." "If," she cut him off, eyes never leaving the garden below. Statues of King Aegon and Queen Visenya rose from beds of pale drift, cloaked in ice like ghosts of themselves. "The word is hollow. I have grown weary of it." He inclined his head. "Then, allow me certainty. There's movement beyond the Trident, a host marching south. Reports are inconsistent, but all speak of dead things walking under banners of frost." A thin breath clouded the glass. She thought of Jaime, far to the west rebuilding the Lannister armies, and of Euron Greyjoy's promises of dominion at sea. Neither stood between King's Landing and a foe made of winter. "Dead things," she murmured, almost amused. "Perhaps my enemies send children's tales to frighten a lonely queen," but a flicker at the edge of vision caught her. In the courtyard, a column of air shimmered, like heat haze inverted. Snow melted in a circle before refreezing into spires of rime, sculpting itself into crystalline shards that gleamed in the morning gloom. Servants gasped and fled. Steel-helmed guards advanced, swords drawn but useless. Something unseen walked among them, leaving no prints, only patterns of glass-hard ice that spread like veins. Cersei's breath stilled. "What am I seeing?" "A herald, perhaps," Qyburn said, voice hushed with fascination rather than fear. "The first shadow of the king who commands winter." The phrase wrapped about her spine. She had worn many crowns, but never had she bowed. Now the air itself seemed to demand obeisance. She drew herself upright. "Send the mountain. Have that thing destroyed." What remained of Sir Gregor was in the yard moments later, towering in blackened armor, sword larger than most men's torsos. The unseen presence paused. Snowflakes hovered, suspended mid-fall. Then, with a crack like splitting bone, every flake crystallized into razors, swirling around the mountain's helm, carving lines in steel. He swung an arm thick as a pillar, but the storm parted, dancing just beyond his reach. Frost bloomed across his visor. Within, the faint ember of necromantic life guttered. Cersei watched, heart thudding in a way she had not felt since her children breathed. She pressed fingers to the window until her knuckles whitened. The mountain, for all Qyburn's arts, staggered. Slower, colder, brittle. A moment later, the swirling razors fused into a singular spear of ice. It struck through helm and skull in one soundless motion. When the spear withdrew, dragging blue-lit mist behind, the mountain collapsed into the snow, a broken idol scoured clean of sin. Gasps rose through the keep. Somewhere a septon shrieked a prayer. Cersei's mouth tasted of copper. She realized she had bitten the inside of her cheek. Blood on her tongue felt warmer than the room. Beneath her, the spear melted without a trace. Yet the circle of frost remained, an emblem of power wrought with casual malice. Only now did she see him. A silhouette atop the eastern rampart, motionless, as though forged from night itself. Antlers of ice crowned his skull-pale brow. Eyes burned the color of glacier hearts. The Night King regarded her with a serenity that felt older than empires. Snow draped his shoulders like a royal mantle, and in his silence lay dominion beyond word. She could not say how she knew, yet certainty hammered in her chest. He had not come for conquest alone. He had come for her. Torches guttered along the walls as cold rolled off him in waves. Guards backed away, swords icing over, leather straps snapping. Qyburn whispered, "We must flee, Your Grace. The dungeons are warded with wildfire chambers. We can lure him within and ignite." "No." The word cracked from her throat before thought. She had never fled in her life, and would not start now. Let dragons, faith, and prophecy conspire against her. She remained queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and a queen does not run. Yet her pulse fluttered with an unfamiliar thrill, fear laced with intrigue. This was no mortal enemy bound by gold or grievance. This was myth walking into her hall, answering a challenge she never voiced. She stepped back from the window and turned on her heel. "Have the men hold the walls. Signal Euron at Dragonstone that King's Landing requires his fleet at once." "Birds do not fly in this storm," Qyburn warned. "The maesters say the cold steals the sky from them." "Then send them on foot if need be," she snapped. "I do not care how." But deep inside, she knew no raven, man, or ship would outrun this winter. Still, orders sustained the illusion of control, and control was breath to her. She strode into the corridor, furs brushing marble, and the chill followed like a hound. Downward she moved through the keep, past knights hacking at encroaching frost that spread along banisters. Each breath produced spectral plumes that lingered too long, as if reluctant to dissipate. Her crown felt heavier, metal leaching warmth. Jewels dimmed beneath rime. At the base of the tower she found Sir Osmond Kettleblack, in blue-tipped armor, lips violet, eyes ringed with frost. "Your Grace," he managed, voice slurred. "We cannot reach the main gate. The corpses, they rise." "Then hold inner doors," she ordered, pushing past. She reached the throne room, that cavernous chamber where dragons once roared. Its stained glass windows webbed with ice. The Iron Throne itself glimmered, blades frosted into strange beauty. Snowflakes drifted from the high beams like motes in a cathedral, and in the aisle stood the Night King. Closer now, she saw that his armor resembled scaleless dragon hide, seams glowing faint sapphire. His complexion was crystalline, yet shaped with alien elegance, cheekbones cut sharp, lips thin as knife lines. He did not breathe. Instead, he radiated a sphere of winter, so pure even footsteps hushed upon approach. Behind him, doors to the throne room hung open, and beyond them shadows moved. Wights, silent phantoms, ranging guards and servants recently slain. But they did not enter. An unspoken boundary held them at bay. This meeting was intimate, almost private, within the Hall of Kings. Cersei stilled at the threshold. For a heartbeat she tasted ashes of wildfire, memory of Sept of Baelor's ruin and her triumph over faith. Power had always smelled of smoke to her. Now it smelled of snow and stillness. She lifted her chin. "You trespass in my city." Her voice echoed across the stone, fragile yet bold. "State your purpose, creature." He tilted his head, studying her as one might examine a rare gem. When he spoke, the sound was not formed in his mouth, but inside her skull. Chimes of cracking ice. "Queen of Ashes, I have come for what is mine." She almost flinched. "Nothing here belongs to you." A slow blink, eyes bluer than the heart of winter. "The world is dying, and I am its final breath. You stand at the precipice of eternity. Join me, or shatter." In another life she might have laughed. Yet the weight of his promise pressed like an iron collar. She felt his gaze seep through her, reading every cruelty and love, every secret she hid even from herself. Jaime upon her bed, her children in golden shrouds, wildfire plumes, the prophecy of a younger queen. He tasted them as flavors on a winter wind. She felt suddenly unclothed, stripped of all masks. But Cersei Lannister had been stripped before. The Walk of Atonement, the jeers, the stones. She had rebuilt herself in iron. "I do not bend," she said, voice low, each word wrapped in steel. A whisper stirred her hair, though no breeze blew. "You will not bend. You will rise." He lifted a hand, fingers elongated into talons of translucent ice. With a gesture, the doors behind Cersei slammed shut, the iron bars freezing solid. Candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging the hall into gloom broken only by the cold luminescence of his eyes. She drew breath to command guards who were no longer there. The hall was emptied of life. Only two figures remained: the queen of a dying realm and the king of the dead. He advanced, soundlessly. His presence tugged at her skin, coaxing goose flesh. She fought the instinct to retreat, though frost formed on her lashes. He raised his hand, not in violence but invitation. An inch from her cheek he paused, studying her like a sculptor before marble. She found herself unable to swallow. Something inside her, fear, curiosity, hunger, willed her to let him. The talon touched her skin. A shock of cold lanced through her, breathtaking yet not painful, a numbness so profound it felt warm on the other side. Her mind flashed to Myrcella's smile, Tommen's tears, Joffrey's violent laugh. Then those memories crystallized, suspended in perfect stasis. Not gone, preserved, untouchable. A serenity flooded her, alien and beautiful, as though sorrow itself froze solid, rendered harmless beneath immaculate ice. She realized tears slipped from her eyes, but they formed pearls of frost on her cheeks. He drew his hand down, fingertips tracing jaw, neck, collarbone, leaving filigrees of hoarfrost upon the velvet. Her pulse slowed, yet with each beat she felt it throb in distant echoes, as if her heart now lay buried beneath glacial glass. She watched his face, searching for cruelty, but found only purpose, a glacier's inevitability. Inside, a voice that had once belonged to Septim Oel hissed of abomination. Sin against the Seven. Cersei crushed it beneath the new hush enveloping her. The world of gods and men had betrayed her children, allowed monsters in robes to parade her naked through mud. This ancient power owed her nothing, expected nothing but surrender. And if she surrendered, she would never hurt again. Her breath fogged once, then not at all. She felt blood thickening, veins turning to frozen rivers carrying pale starlight. Yet she remained standing, alive, aware, reborn. The Night King's eyes softened, if such a creature could soften, and he withdrew his hand. Where his talon had touched her chest, a pattern emerged, luminous beneath skin. Fractal sigils of ice spreading outward, forming a brilliant coronal star between her breasts. She swayed but did not fall. He spoke into her thoughts. "Behold, the twilight crown. Through you, the realm shall dream of silence." She inhaled or tried. Breath came not through lungs, but through every shard of newly minted essence. When she answered, frost drifted from her lips like petals. "I feel infinite." In response he knelt, not in fealty but in recognition of union. From behind his back he drew a blade, pale as new moonlight, forged of dragon glass. He offered it hilt first. Cersei took it without hesitation. The moment her fingers closed, the hilt merged with her flesh, as though grown for her hand alone. She raised the weapon, staring at its edge, seeing reflected not her face, but endless winter skies. Beyond the closed doors, screams echoed faintly. Men called to defend a city already lost. She felt no urgency, only certainty that their cries belonged to another age. She strode toward the Iron Throne. Each step left prints that froze into crystalline roses. Arriving at the dais, she paused. The throne, built of conquered blades, seemed suddenly small. a relic of mortal ego. She lifted the dragonglass sword and laid its flat against the twisted metal. Frost spider webbed across iron, silencing the memories of all who had bled for it. She pressed harder, and with a brittle crack, the throne split down the center. Shards rang across the hall, tinkling like glass bells. She turned, golden hair turning pale as snow, strands crystallizing into shimmering filaments that tinkled when they moved. The Night King watched, expression unchanged, yet a deeper glow lit his eyes. She descended the steps, and where her gown brushed marble, ice lilies bloomed, white petals edged in sapphire flame. Together, they walked to the great doors. At her gesture, they shattered outward, falling like brittle parchment. The corridor beyond was littered with frozen corpses, eyes blue and waiting. She spoke, and her voice carried two notes, hers and his, braided together. Rise. Instantly, the dead stirred. Knights of the Kingsguard lifted heads glazed in frost. Servants clambered from beneath fallen chandeliers, every body touched by the cold reanimated beneath her command. She felt them, countless candles of blue fire in her mind, obeying without question. She drew breath she no longer needed, and felt exhilaration rather than guilt. Life had been a chain of loss. Unlife was a crown without weight. Quiburn appeared at the far end, staggering, face mottled purple with frostbite. "Your Grace," he croaked. "What have you done?" She smiled, and her lips cracked, revealing the gleam of diamond beneath flesh. "I have at last become what this world deserves." He tried to retreat, but ice spears burst from the floor, impaling him through knees and shoulders, pinning him like a fly. She walked past without another glance. His screams dwindled behind her as she descended into the outer courtyards. The city spread below, roofs sagging under snow, docks etched in ash-gray ice. Fires burned here and there, small defiances against the absolute. She raised her hand and felt wind gather, swirling above her palm, coalescing into a crown of swirling frost. It drifted upward and settled upon her hair, fusing instantly. In that moment, the first sunbeam of dawn broke through low clouds, striking the crown and refracting into 1,000 shards, casting dancing lights across the silent court. The Night King stood beside her, and for the first time she sensed acknowledgement. Two monarchs in accord. "My city," she whispered, voice carrying across ramparts like a hush. Below, citizens stumbled from doorways, blinking at the spectral dawn. She could feel their pulses, a symphony of warmth soon to dim. But not yet. This night's revelation was for her alone. She raised her dragonglass sword and traced it through the air. Where the blade passed, snowflakes froze mid-flight, forming a bridge of mirrored particles stretching out over the lower city. With each step, she took upon that impossible path. The flakes compacted into solid glass, bearing her weight. The Night King followed, wights forming a retinue behind him, silent as thoughts. From that vantage, she saw the black water entirely frozen, ships locked like flies in amber. The chain Tyrion once raised lay beneath sheets of ice. Irrelevant now. She breathed in the still air, and the world exhaled. Far to the north she sensed his dragon screeching over Rosby. A cry of hunger answered by markets already emptied. She closed her eyes and felt every heartbeat between here and Maidenpool. Small fluttering lamps waiting to be snuffed. Yet amid this vast quiet, one ember pulsed brighter. The golden heart of Jaime Lannister riding hard from Riverrun, oblivious to the blizzard's true master. She tasted love there, bitter, potent. It tugged at her, a memory clinging to frozen flesh. She opened her eyes. A single tear, crystalline, slipped down her cheek, but shattered before reaching the bridge. The Night King watched but did not interfere. Love would fade. Winter would remain. They reached the roof of the great Sepp's ruin, now a pit dusted with snow. Cersei knelt beside the scorched stones, where once thousands died at her will. She placed a hand upon the rubble. Frost spread and the stones groaned, rising, rebuilding themselves in silence. Arches lifted from shattered bases, buttresses climbed the air like saplings awakening. Yet this was no Sept of the Seven. Spires twisted skyward in spirals of glass and ice, windows filled with translucent blue panes. In minutes, a cathedral of winter stood where ash once lay. Within, altars formed of diamond crust awaited no prayer, only reverence to the cold. She rose, admiring her handiwork, and for the first time she laughed. The sound echoed like chiming icicles, bright and terrible. "Let them come," she declared to the still morning. "Let dragons, lions, wolves, let the world's last fires rage. They will find no warmth here." Above, clouds thickened again, gray turning to black. Snow fell heavier, swirling in vengeful dance. The Night King stepped beside her upon the cathedral's pinnacle, and together they gazed across the city that glittered beneath burgeoning ice. Ships would bring armies, dragons would breathe flame, prophecies would stir heroes. But here and now, Queen Cersei Lannister was reborn. No longer Lioness of the Rock, but Ice Queen of the Long Night. Winter's hymn shuddered through every stone, promising eternity in hush and crystal. She closed her eyes and listened, heart quiet, sword glowing faintly at her side. In the distance, horns sounded along the Roserwad, banners of the Reach perhaps, answering rumors of frost. She smiled. Let them march. Snow would meet them, and she would greet their champions with a kiss colder than death. Behind her, the Night King raised his arms, and from the cathedral's shadow soared thousands of ravens turned alabaster, wings shedding shards of frost as they flew. They carried no messages other than the silent testament of winter. Below, peasants huddled beneath doorways, watched the sky blossom with ice-feathered birds, and knelt despite the cold leaching through their skins. They did not know why they bent the knee, only that something vaster than fear passed overhead. Cersei's gaze flicked over them, noting each bowed head like chess pieces arranged by destiny. She raised her hand again, and snow thickened, dulling screams, muffling the city into reverent quiet. King's Landing, city of sin and smoke, was becoming a garden of crystal. Hours later, or minutes, time lost its hold. She returned to the Red Keep. Ice creaked beneath her boots, yet never cracked. In her bedchamber, she found tapestries stiff with frost, the golden lions dulled to pale ghosts. She touched one, and threads unraveled into snow dust. She would weave new banners soon, sigils of a crown shaped by frostbite. For now she sat at her writing desk, dragonglass sword across her lap, and wrote upon a parchment that instantly iced. To Jaime, my brother, my love, come to King's Landing and lay down your sword. I have found peace in the silence of winter. I would share it with you. She sealed it with a kiss, her lips imprinting a snowflake incapable of melting. The Night King entered without knocking. Doors bowed before him. She handed him the letter. He brushed a fingertip across the seal and nodded. A raven, feathers white as moonlight, landed upon the sill. He tied the scroll to its leg. With a whisper of wings it vanished into the swirling dusk. Cersei watched it go, an old ache stirring. But she exhaled, releasing longing into the cold until it stilled. She stood, turning to the window. Beyond, the cathedral of ice caught the setting sun, prisms scattering between ever-deepening clouds. She felt the city's final fires gutter. Snowdrifts crept through streets, each step of her whites packing earth into frozen permanence. In the Blackwater, cracks spidered beneath hulls, sundering wood with sighs resembling distant cries. Night descended swift and absolute. The moon rose, haloed by shards of starlight. Cersei stepped onto her balcony. Wind coursed through her crystalline hair, and each strand sang. A chorus of tiny bells. On the parapet, the Night King joined her. He did not speak. Words seemed relics now. Instead, he offered his hand. She placed hers upon it, fingers lacing, frost melding skin to skin. Together, they gazed northward, where horizon dissolved into swirling white. In that endless snow, she saw the future. Silent, unbroken, and hers. Yet the silence trembled. A distant roar echoed from beyond the city walls, deep and defiant. The cry of a dragon, molten with fury. She recognized its timbre. Drogon, child of the Silver Queen across the narrow sea. Fire against frost. The prophecy of conquest and vengeance come at last. The sound stirred the last ember of her old self, a flicker of rivalry that warmed for half a heartbeat. She smiled, baring teeth diamond bright. "Let her come," she whispered, voice brittle and sure. "We will teach fire to kneel." The Night King's eyes flashed in agreement. Far below, citizens lifted faces to the sky, seeing a red comet streak toward the harbor. No comet, but dragon flames slicing through storm clouds. Screams rose anew, but Cersei's heart stilled, serene in the approaching storm of heat. Within her chest, the fractal star pulsed brighter, summoning cold deeper than Dragonfire's heart. She tightened her fingers around the Night Kings, and the world below them seemed to hush in anticipation of the clash of ice and flame. King's Landing, once ruled by petty intrigues, now stood a stage for powers that sculpted ages. And at its heart, the newly crowned Ice Queen awaited her first true test, not with fear, but with the boundless patience of winter. Flames would rage, yes, but winter would watch, and winter would listen, and winter, through Cersei's frozen veins, would learn how best to put out the sun. Nah. The roar rippled through the night, like a furnace blast, turning snowflakes to steam in midair before they had time to settle. On the balcony, the newly crowned Ice Queen felt the tremor pass through her, not as heat but as vibration, as if a distant gong struck within her frozen marrow. The Night King did not flinch. Together they watched the heavens bruise red, where a tongue of living flame carved open the low clouds, exposing a rift of stars quaking in the sudden convective surge. Somewhere in the frozen reaches beyond Fleabottom, buildings kindled, their timbers taking fire the instant a stray ember drifted down. Yet the flames faltered almost at once, smothered beneath the slow crush of gathering ice. A second roar followed the first, deeper, punctuated by the frantic hiss of wings forced to labor in an alien sky. Every beat of Drogon's pinions battered a corridor of warmth through the snowstorm, only for the wound to cauterize in crystal seconds later. Below, figures fled in uneven lines, little bursts of motion that vanished into drifts the moment the dragon's heat gave out. Cersei's new senses tracked each flicker of life the way a huntsman might follow candle glow through the woods, with mild curiosity rather than hunger. Hunger implied need, and need belonged to the living. The Night King turned his head, eyes narrowed to pale slits. A ripple of intent radiated outward, silent but palpable. Far beneath the battlements, thousands of wights shuddered back to motion, arms stiff as clubs, joints cracking as they lifted rusted blades, or shards of porchwood still nailed with iron hinges. They poured through gates already half torn from their moorings by frost, spilling into courtyards where horses lay frozen mid-whinny, curved lashes glittering with hoarfrost. Cersei stepped forward until the high wind nipped at the hem of her gown. Cold did not bother her. What little flesh remained soft was insulated beneath an exoskeleton of living rime that responded to her will, like a second skin. She raised one gloved hand. The glove cracked and fell away in flecks, revealing fingers formed now of translucent crystal veined in captive starlight. She flexed them, admiring the prismatic fractures that danced across the ice. The great dragon dove again, sweeping over the frozen Blackwater with wings so wide they stirred every pennon on the city's ramparts. Flames jetted from his maw, a cataract of incandescent orange, whose glare turned snow to flying beads of glass. Those beads rained upon rooftops in soft tinkling rushes, harmless, most shattering to diamond dust on chilled tiles. Cersei sensed the fury of the beast, and beyond it the heartbeat of its rider, harder to read through layers of scale and wavefronts of heat. Yet the pulse was there, defiant and hot, like a war drum challenging the hush of her realm. She inclined her head, inviting the Night King's attention. A thin plume of vapor issued from his nostrils. Perhaps amusement, perhaps thought escaping invisible form. Without words he extended his arm. The silent order spread like chain lightning through the assembled dead, from officer to footman, from guardswoman half encased in mail, to baker slain with rolling pin still lashed to wrist. They filed into ranks, their footfalls leaving perfect impressions that immediately filled with new ice, erasing evidence of movement. A trumpet blast rolled from the far side of the city, ragged but brave. In the firelit quarter toward the dragon pit, banners of red displayed the three-headed sigil, now blackened at their edges. Soldiers of Dragonstone marched in double columns behind unsullied spear bristles, their sandaled feet sliding on streets that moments before had been mere cobbles, and now were sheets of translucent alabaster. Torches guttered as they advanced, each flame sucking hungrily at an atmosphere robbed of pliant air. High above, Drogon wheeled in a slow spiral. Daenerys Targaryen crouched low on his neck. White rye flower snow caked the braids that trailed from beneath her helm. Every curse she hurled at the storm was ripped from her mouth, snatched and frozen to crystalline shards before the words could fade behind her. She pressed a gauntlet to the obsidian spikes of Drogon's spine and tried to sense him, tried to calm the fear edging his ferocity. He was fire made flesh, but fire needs breath, and the air this night belonged to another element entirely. She leaned close to his ear flap, murmuring encouragement, even as she felt each breath he took burn shorter, chest heaving against encroaching chill that no natural cold could produce. Beneath her other arm, a cloth-wrapped parcel knocked repeatedly at her ribs. The obsidian spearhead Samwell Tarly had pressed into her palm the day she left Winterfell, 3 moons ago, swearing it came from the last of Dragonstone's ancient form. She did not know if the spear could end a creature shaped of night, but she meant to find out. Drogon dived again, this time toward the Red Keep itself. Pillars of swirling ice rose like claws, trying to intercept his passage. He banked left, but one claw nicked the trailing edge of a wing. Frost spread across the membrane faster than fire could chase it. Daenerys felt the tremor in the dragon's bones, saw the flash of fear in the black eye as the membrane stiffened. She drew her arm back and drove her gloved fist into the ice, shattering it to powder. But powder recongealed in the air behind them, knitting itself into fresh barbs already groping for a second strike. Along the battlements, archers of the Golden Company, those who had bent the knee to her 2 days after arriving under white banners, loosed fire arrows toward the keep. The arrows fell short. Flames winked out mid-flight, reduced to spurts of gray steam that hardened into sleet pellets before they reached the walls. A few splintered on stone, embedding arrow shafts useless as icicles. On the balcony, Cersei lifted her face, studying the tapestry of attack and defense, as if observing artwork being born. She spread her arms. The aurora of frost that crowned her flared wider, filling the night with ripples of emerald and violet light unseen south of the frost fangs since the long night of myth. Those waves of color slid across droplet-laden clouds, painting them in phosphorescent ripples that sapped warmth as surely as a smith's quench. She thought of the myths told by wet nurses, a shadow queen in the Age of Heroes who took the hand of the night's king and ruled beside him at the wall. She wondered if the songs had a name for her new aspect. No matter. The singer would be winter itself, and its verses would outlast any tongue. Within the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister had reached the base of Aegon's high hill after 3 days of punishing ride. His mare had collapsed half a mile out, lungs filling with snow as solidifying slush. He'd made the rest of the way on foot, dragging his sword hand useless in the cold, golden fingers ringing with each step against the hilt he could barely hold. He hardly recognized the fortress ahead. Ramparts laced with glimmering serpents of ice, bastions crowned in spires that caught the moonlight and refracted it into lances of killing light. At the gate of the gods he met a sight to chill even Lannister blood. Ser Balin Swan, whom Jaime had left months ago in the Prince's Pass, stood sentinel, face blue, eyes a vacant cobalt. Swan turned his head, bones creaking, and saluted with a sword rimed in white glass. It was courtesy, not welcome. Jaime read the warning. Pass, and you will join us. He retreated under cover of collapsed archways until he reached the charred husk of the armorer's yard. A torch lay half buried in the drift. He struck flint against stone. Sparks died before they landed. The air was too thin, or too strange to nurse a flame. Yet he had come too far for torches. He had come to find Cersei or die. He turned toward the main stair that wound like a corkscrew up the hillside. Halfway up the first flight he passed bodies contorted into postures of terror, their tears frozen mid-cheek like jeweled insects. He recognized a stable boy who once brought saddlebags of apples to the royal stalls. The boy's arm was outstretched, fingers shattered from pounding at a door that never opened. Jaime moved on, numbness competing with memory. High overhead, the dragon roared again. Jaime paused beneath a portico littered with fallen tiles, gazing upward through a gap in the roof. He saw the black silhouette of wings against swirling auroras. Saw orange furnace breath bloom wide enough to swallow a sept. For an instant, the warmth of that fire reached him, a caress so sudden his knees weakened. He leaned against the arch and felt ice melt under his palm, droplets running like tears across scaled gauntlet. For the first time in hours he remembered the taste of wine, the smell of Cersei's hair in summer, the weight of their third-born when he lifted the boy to a window to see lions stalking the western fields. He straightened. Memory could keep a man walking when reason failed. Inside the keep's grand hall, Cersei descended a staircase of ice lilies that sprouted beneath each step. Her whites parted to let her pass, heads bowed. She had chosen not to ride in palanquin or on the monstrous polar bear that lumbered somewhere in her menagerie of dead. Her authority did not require height. It required presence. Each breath of hers set the cadence of snowfall outside. Each pulse of her fractal star adjusted the hardness of the skies. At the plaza before Maegor's Holdfast, she paused. Drogon hovered 500 feet above, beating stationary as if weighing whether to strike. His rider's gaze bored downward in challenge. Cersei's new eyes allowed no secrets. She saw the desperation in that steadying hand on dragon reins. Saw the shortness of breaths beneath the queen's furs. The Ice Queen raised her right arm. At once, a host of ravens swept from the eaves, pale wings glinting. Each bird carried a shard of mirrored ice clenched in talons. They spiraled upward, a helix of tinkling blades aimed at the dragon who thought the air his kingdom. Daenerys tapped Drogon's neck. The dragon rolled wing over wing, flame sputtering in the frigid vacuum left where warmth should have swirled. The shards streaked by, most missing, but a dozen found belly scale or wing muscle. The dragon shrieked, pitching, yet Daenerys held her seat, gripping spike and harness with gauntleted fists. Blood, sanguine and steaming, rained in beads that hardened quickly to rubies before striking streets below. Within those streets, Grey Worm propelled his unsullied forward. Each man carried a torch dipped in whale oil, a trick learned from sailors of the Shivering Sea, a flame that could burn across ice. Even those torches sputtered, but they burned long enough for unsullied spear points to heat to red-black, stabbing whites and searing flesh where cold had ruled. Yet every corpse they felled stood again minutes later, unless burned entirely. The commander realized the dilemma. Victory required flame greater than flesh could sustain. He lifted his helm and called for the wildfire barrels. Daenerys maesters had mixed from captured stocks beneath the dragon pit. Barrels rolled downhill, bumping over rime. Some shattered prematurely. Green gouts whooshed skyward, a brief sun beneath the moon. The fire licked along battlements, consuming whites in clumps. Cersei felt their extinguished blue stars blink out of her awareness. The vanishings produced a faint twinge, neither pain nor sorrow, more like the note missing from a chord. She realized she was growing to prefer the symphony complete. She strode to the outer balustrade. Her dragonglass sword remained sheathed at her side, but she did not need it for the effort ahead. She extended both arms, fingers splayed. Frost from her palms spiraled outward, forming twin vortices above each shoulder. Those vortices drew in air, thickening it until it cracked. A sound like distant thunder shook the castle. Clouds condensed, then split. Two shapes emerged, wyverns of pure ice, their wings as broad as Drogon's, bodies latticed in curvilinear geometry so perfect it hurt mortal eyes. They beat once and ascended, catching moonbeams inside hollow bones that glowed a ghastly opal. Daenerys saw them and hissed through clenched teeth. She patted Drogon's neck and urged upward, but the ice wyverns met him mid-climb. Their mouths exhaled draughts of air cold as the void between stars. Frost rhymed Drogon's snout. He bellowed flame in return, throttled though it was. Fire clashed with infinite cold, and produced pillars of steam that froze before they dissipated, forming jagged salt sculptures, tumbling earthward. Amid this aerial duel, Brienne of Tarth arrived at the king's gate. sword Brightroar borrowed from the Lannister vault gripped in both hands. The steel gave off faint warmth, a relic forged of Valyrian stock centuries gone. She carved through lesser whites, golden blade flaring whenever it bit rotting sinew. Podrick Payne stayed near her, thumping at knees with a mace whose head steamed each time it emerged from sundered torsos. Behind them rode Sir Davos Seaworth, crossbow slung, and quiver loaded with obsidian bolts pilfered from Dragonstone's caverns. They moved toward the Red Keep step by step. The snow around Brienne hissed away as Brightroar's magic shed flickers of resisting fire, buying small sanctuaries for survivors. Limping along behind, small folk who had fled the markets, 2 mewling babes bound in shawls, a midwife, a baker missing 3 fingers to frostbite. The unwounded aided the wounded, turning the column into something between retreat and pilgrimage, heading not for safety, which no longer existed, but for proximity to the one flame, still stubborn enough to burn. On the battlements above, Jaime spotted the shining sword long before he recognized the wielder beneath wolf fur cloak. That radiance stirred memory of father's study, where Brightroar had once hung before its loss in Valyria. His chest tightened. If the sword was found, perhaps so could Cersei be found, lost as if to Valyria herself. He quickened his pace. Inside Maegor's fastness, Cersei felt the fissure of old love pressing against the glacial calm. Jaime had entered the outer ward. She sensed his heartbeat distinctly, quicksilver and hot, yet flickering under exertion. She lifted a finger, tracing an invisible calligraph across the air. Frost motes arranged themselves into a sigil of intertwining roses, a map visible only to her whites. They pooled toward the courtyard where Jaime would next step, converging in silence. Elsewhere, Sandor Clegane staggered from the cellars beneath the dragon pit, carrying a cask of wildfire balanced on one shoulder. His half-healed burns crawled anew as the cold gnawed exposed flesh. He spat curses at the snow, at the ghosts, at the gods that refused him peace. Nearby, Arya Stark slipped through alleys under a hood of white wolf fur, eyes narrowed, dagger of Valyrian steel slapping her thigh. She hunted for the core of this frost, believing not in prophecy or in light, but in the efficiency of a knife slid under a chin. A horn blared atop the septiglass, the cathedral Cersei had crafted of shattered sept stones. The sound was crystalline, issuing from the throats of faceless ravens perched along its eaves. With each note, snow swirled in concentrics spreading out from the Red Keep. Farmlands 40 leagues distant felt the gale, crops already winter-killed crusted under a second sheath. Back in the plaza, Grey Worm's wildfire charge detonated along the outer gate of the keep. Green fire fountained, and for an instant the frost receded, screaming under the alchemical onslaught. Fresh whites roasted where they stood, ice lilies brown to ash. Cersei's head turned, pale hair chiming. She watched the green glow reflection dance across the chitin of her frozen cheek. She admired the fire's audacity, its quick brilliance. Such defiance kindled a shard of respect. She responded with art. She lowered her palm, and a new bloom of ice surged outward from her feet, but this time patterned in spirals that captured and compressed the expanding heat of wildfire. Where flames should have spread, they folded inward, trapped in curlicues of refracting crystal until they dirtied to a dim teal and died. Grey Worm's shoulders sagged. He ordered another detonation. The same thing happened. Flame of Man could not compete with the artistry of Winter's Queen. High above, Drogon screamed as an ice wyvern's talons raked his flank. The wounds smoked, blood sizzling like water on iron. Daenerys leaned forward, whispering the Dracarys' command. But the flame came thin. She felt Drogon's furnace failing, felt his confusion. Not since Meereen had he known doubt. She scanned below for the Queen of Ice, found her at last, a slim figure statue still amid the swirl. Fury kindled where fear sought root. She guided Drogon into a steep dive, spearhead clutched under one arm. Cersei watched the descent. Her left hand closed to a fist. Shards of ice the size of axes erupted from crenellations, thrusting upward like defensive stakes. Drogon tucked wings, skimming between them with inches to spare. The Queen raised her right hand, drawing condensed vapor into a spindle that hardened to a javelin longer than any man. With a flick, she hurled it. Mid-air, Daenerys slipped from her saddle, trusting Drogon's last moment of lift to stabilize. She plummeted free, cloak snapping. In that instant, the ice javelin missed Dragon, and instead stabbed empty space where Ryder had been. The miss forced Cersei's eyes wider in something nearing surprise. Before the ice could arc back, Daenerys twisted, hurled her obsidian spear with all the strength left in aching arm. The black projectile spun end over end, trailing brief fire where friction melted frost. It struck the balcony rail a foot from Cersei's heart. Ice erupted, splinters showering the courtyard. Cersei felt the sting of a shard slicing cheek, a single line of scarlet melting across near-translucent flesh. She touched the cut with 2 fingers. Blood of an ice queen did not flow in drops, but in slow coiling threadlets that froze, even as they appeared, forming rubies on her fingertips. Above, Daenerys landed on Drogon's back as he completed the dive. Her knees buckled, but she stayed mounted. She snapped reins, urging him upward again. She cursed to see her spear had failed to strike flesh. Yet the moment marked more than miss or graze. For the first time since her transformation, Cersei bled. The Night King turned toward her, head canted, something like caution stirring behind glacial eyes. She shook her head minutely, an unspoken declaration she needed no aid. She pressed 2 frozen fingers to the wound. The bleeding slowed, stopped, crystallized. She drew the same blood across her lips, painting them deep wine red. The color shocked against bone-white skin, regal and terrible. She felt a stirring of mortal vanity, but crushed it quickly. Adornment was unnecessary, yet symbolism powerful. Let fire see frost could still redden, but choose not to die. Jaime reached the foot of the tower. 2 whites barred the stair. Men he had once commanded, their faces lost to pale mold. A spear of corroded iron lunged at him. He parried clumsily with sword half numb in golden fingers, but momentum carried him forward, shoulder slamming ribcage. Bones cracked. His or theirs, he could not tell. He pushed on, panting, heart hammering louder than distant dragon screams. The tower seemed endless. Halfway up, he heard a voice behind, Brienne calling his name. He spun. She shouldered through whites, bright roar cleaving arcs of molten orange where cold parted. For a heartbeat, they faced one another across a landing littered in hoarfrost and limbs. Recognition flashed. Sorrow quick after. Then they moved together, back to back, climbing. On the rampart, the duel between sky beasts reached crescendo. Drogon, bleeding from half a dozen rents, latched jaws upon the throat of one ice wyvern. His teeth met brittle spine. The creature shattered, fragments of sculpted ice spinning like broken chandelier glass. Yet the effort cost him. The second wyvern seized his wing root. A spray of blood whipped across the night. Drogon tilted, losing altitude. Daenerys clung, shouting. One hand pressed to a wound at her temple where ice shard had grazed skin. Cersei saw opportunity. She raised both hands and the sky darkened, as if a moon phase occurred instantaneously. The cold deepened to a colorless black. It funneled into a bolt, jagged as lightning, but moving with the steady inevitability of glacier slide, aimed square at the Dragon Queen. Arya Stark witnessed the gathering storm from a perch on a half-collapsed rooftop near the Street of Flower. She balanced light as a cat, judging distances. She drew a small glass knife tipped with obsidian, gift from the children of the forest, stolen from a ruin in the north. She knew she had one throw and one target. Not the Night King, but his queen beside him, the keystone newly forged. She inhaled. Jaime and Brienne burst through a final archway onto the balcony. Cersei stood with back turned, arms aloft, hair a corona of tinkling shards. Jaime saw the blood trail upon her cheek. For a heartbeat he thought her injured, his Cersei saved. Then he recognized what she had become. The breath left him fogless, stolen by the very aura of her presence. Brienne raised bright roar in shock. Its flame guttered, uncertain. Cersei did not turn, wholly fixed on the dragon plummeting. She would end fire now, before fire's rider could land another blow. Arya released her knife. It flew, a whisper against the storm, almost invisible, a speck of darkness swallowed in roiling snow. At the same moment, Jaime shouted her name. "Cersei!" A plea and warning entwined. She pivoted, eyes widening not at her brother, but at the oncoming shard of obsidian singing through the air. Instinct moved her left hand. An icicle shield blossomed. The knife struck, embedding but not penetrating. Obsidian met enchanted frost, cracks webbing outward with a thunderclap. The backlash rocked her stance. The bolt of glacial energy she'd summoned loosed prematurely, misfiring into the courtyard below, where it burst into a cyclone of white that swallowed 100 whites and 50 unsullied in equal measure before dissipating. Drogon seized the pause, beating wings frantic, struggling free of the final wyvern, which shrieked after but broke off, spiraling back to its maker. Daenerys regained altitude, blood matting hair against brow. Knife clattered to the balcony floor, its edge dulled. Cersei's gaze snapped to Jaime. She saw the guilt, the desperate hope, the misplaced love. Somewhere deep she felt old affection stir, but the queen's new nature froze it mid-flutter. She spoke with ice cracking. "Jaime, did you come to kneel, or to die?" He lowered his sword. "I came to take you home." "There is no home but winter." Brienne interposed, bright roar up. Cersei's eyes flicked to the sword. Bright roar steamed, its enchantment resisting, but dimmer than before. She flicked 2 fingers. The sword iced instantly, flames choked. Brienne gasped, forced to drop the hilt as frost spread into glove, numbing hand to elbow. Jaime lunged, golden hand outstretched, but could not reach before Cersei conjured a lattice of ice between them, a cage blossoming at speed. He slammed into the barrier, metal palm cracking through one layer before the structure thickened. Below, the Night King perceived his queen's peril. For the first time, he moved with haste, striding toward the tower as frost serpents ferried him upward in spiraling lifts. Arya, seeing her throw fail, knocked an obsidian arrow to a stolen Myrish crossbow. She aimed at his advancing form but wavered. A riderless horse barreled into the rooftop, collapsing timber beneath her. She tumbled, lost sightline, cursed softly as she vanished into a flurry of snowflakes. Daenerys urged Drogon into a shallow dive toward the balcony where Jaime and Brienne were trapped, hoping to lend what aid an inferno could. Yet as they neared, she saw the veil of ice swirl again, thicker than before, forming a dome around Cersei and the 2 knights. Fire might not penetrate without hurting those she meant to save. She veered off, scanning for allies on the ground who might breach from below. On the street, Sandor Clegane ignited his cask of wildfire, with a sparkstone he'd kept hidden in a belt pouch. The glass neck blew wide, green flames licking over his arms. He roared at the familiar burn but refused to drop the payload. Instead, he hurled it into the courtyard of Maegor's Holdfast at the very foot of the frost dome. The explosion rattled foundations, sending a jolt through ice strong enough to spiderweb cracks. Inside, Jaime felt the cage tremble. He pummeled with golden hand, each blow ringing like Smith's hammer on steel. Brienne reclaimed Bright Roar, the weapon flickering back to life in sudden gust as cracks formed. Together they hammered. Cersei's brow furrowed. She pressed her palms to the barrier, pouring energy to repair. But another jolt resounded. Arya had clambered to a new vantage branching from the Tower of the Hand, loosing obsidian arrows in triplicate. Each lodged in a fracture, widening the breach. Outside the dome, the Night King arrived. He raised a single finger. The cracks halted, edges fusing. Wildfire's heat funneled upward, choked, then died as if starved of color. Jaime despaired, until a sound rolled across the city unlike any before. Bells? No. A horn of the deep. From the harbor, Euron Greyjoy's silence had returned. Its figurehead wreathed in weirwood leaves turned frozen scarlet. Great braziers along deck rails pouring fire oil that burned hotter than dragon flame. Behind silence, a half-dozen ironborn longships followed, their sails ablaze with captured wildfire, black-green plumes streaming heavenward. Bolts of burning pitch arced from ship-mounted scorpions, showering the city's seaward wall. They burst inside courtyards, setting whites alight faster than frost could quench. One bolt pierced the torso of the last remaining ice wyvern circling over the mud gate. The creature fell in pieces, each fragment dissolving to twinkling powder before hitting ground. Cersei sensed ironborn intention and grimaced. She had once trusted Euron to bring her victory, but he had delivered her to winter only by absence. Now he returned not for love but empire. She motioned downward. Glacial spires erupted from the shoreline, skewering two longships. Silence danced between, its enchanted hull slick with oil, sliding past obstacles with unnatural dexterity. On deck, Euron howled, one eye patch frozen to brow, the other bright with mania. He leveled his gilded eyeline toward the Red Keep. With a flourish, he lit the fuse of a trebuchet sling, loaded not with stone, but with a cask wrought in Korth, powdered obsidian mixed with shyish saltpeter. The sling loosed. The cask soared trailing sparks, clearing battlements, arcing in perfect trajectory toward the Frost Dome. The Night King saw the incoming star and stepped forward, raising both hands. Time seemed to slow as multiple forces converged. Drogon diving again, unsullied rallying with fresh torches, Brienne and Jaime pressing at interior seams, Arya leaping for another angle, Sandor hauling twin torches to hurl, Euron laughing through cracked lips. Cersei made her choice. She extended her mind to every white within the plaza and gave a single command: converge. They swarmed the courtyard, piling atop one another, forming a shield of bodies at the dome's base. The cask struck their mass and exploded, obsidian dust slicing through dead flesh. The shockwave flayed outer layers, but the core held, fracture lines spidering yet not destroying the shield. Inside, shards of the blast vibrated through floor. Jaime seized the moment of distraction. He plunged his golden hand, fingers splayed, into the largest fissure. The metal glowed red hot where it touched enchanted ice, steam screaming. He drove forward with all remaining strength. Brienne placed both hands on his shoulders, adding weight. The fracture yawned. Cersei felt intrusions, her concentration thin. Blood pulsed again at the cheek wound, ruby line beginning anew. She hissed, placed both palms outward, ready to end them if need be. But the Night King touched her shoulder. Calm washed through, a glacier's assurance. He stepped around her, gaze fixed on Jaime. The brothers locked eyes across ice and ruin. Jaime saw no anger, no malice in those blue depths. Only fate, cold and steady. The Night King lifted a finger. Jaime's sword arm stiffened. Fingers refused command. Golden hand fused to the ice, encased. He yanked back and felt metal snap at the wrist. The stump bled, steaming. He staggered, bright roar falling from numb grasp. Godot. Brienne caught him, muffling a cry. Cersei watched, a flicker of something warring beneath frostbound veil. Pity? Regret? Then subsided, sealed under ice. Above them, Drogon released a final roar, a torch extinguishing all at once. His lungs could not draw. The cold stole breath as fast as muscle labored. He beat wings weakly, losing altitude until he landed on the plaza outside the dome. Claws skidding through snow. Daenerys slid from saddle, feet crunching on frozen flagstone. She staggered, chest heaving, spearless, hope flickering. She saw Jaime slumped, Brienne braced, Cersei remote behind shifting walls of ice. She pressed a hand to Drogon's flank, willing fire to rise one last time. It sputtered but caught. A gout of flame spilled across plaza toward the dome. The Night King stood unshielded, watching. He raised a palm. Flame struck an invisible barrier and curled back. Steam enveloped everything in a blinding shroud. When mist cleared, Cersei stepped through a newly opened gateway, dragonglass sword drawn dots. Its blade glimmered with faint inner aurora, hungry for final coronation. She approached Daenerys, each footfall carving roses of hoarfrost. Behind her, the Night King remained within, ensuring dome stayed intact, prison for those still inside. Daenerys lifted both hands, fingers curled, readying the old dance of whip and rein, though she held neither. Cersei circled, sword tip trailing lines that froze into raised tendrils of ice. The Ironborn in the harbor fired another salvo. Long claws of flame soared, but Cersei flicked her wrist. The missile stuttered mid-air, halting as if suspended by puppet strings. She rotated sword point downward, and the flaming bolts pivoted, aimed now at silence. Euron's one good eye widened. He screamed, whether in terror or ecstasy none could tell, as his own ammunition rained back upon him. The deck blossomed into green inferno. The flagship's belly split, disgorging skull-adorned figurehead to the waves. In the momentary hush after cataclysm, Cersei lunged. Her blade streaked ecliptic, aiming for Daenerys' throat. The Dragon Queen ducked, rolled, came up with a handful of shattered spear shafts she'd found on ground. She parried, wood smoking under frost. Sparks hissed where contact bit. Cersei riposted, slashing cloak, nicking shoulder. Blood flowed hot. It steamed, then froze in course halfway down bicep. Daenerys ignored sting, turned the motion into elbow strike that connected with crystalline chin. The Ice Queen's head snapped sideways, fracture lines blooming in cheek, refreezing at once. She smiled with half-shattered lip. Jaime, inside the dome, beat in vain at walls. Brienne tried again with bright roar, but each strike dulled flame further. Across courtyard Sandor hurled final torch. It bounced, extinguished. Grey Worm rallied, remaining unsullied, forming ring around Dragon, shielding while he labored to breathe. Twice more Cersei's blade kissed Daenerys, shallow cuts that chilled deeper than they bled. The Targaryen retreated toward Drogon's side, every exhale visible. Cersei advanced inexorably. Her sword began to hum, aurora intensifying. One more blow might finish it. Yet within Cersei something trembled. Each wound inflicted warmed the air fractionally, leaving pockets where memory stirred. Images of her children flickered, as though Daenerys' blood carried echoes of motherhood. A kinship of lost heirs. The rosefrost beneath her feet faltered. She frowned, shook head, reasserted winter. A new sound cracked the night. The beating of gigantic wings, not Drogon's. From the north a shape descended. Viserion, the undead dragon, eyes blazing blue, ridden by ghostly lieutenant. He answered the Night King's unspoken summons, spiraling to join the fray. Frost flame leaking from his ruined jaws. He roared a greeting to Drogon, brother against brother now reversed. Daenerys' heart twisted. She had mourned Viserion on the ice lake, seeing him in bondage, yet again lit fire deeper than fear. She squared shoulders, slipping off cloak, letting chill bite bare arms. Cersei felt that surge, felt the mortal core refusing to extinguish. She raised her sword overhead. Ice-along blade whipped into serrated flares, lengthening weapon to two-handed cleaver. Inside the dome, Jaime collapsed to knees, strength gone, watching the tableau outside through crystal veil. The woman he loved poised to slay the breaker of chains. The dragon he once feared, gasping behind unsullied shields. The Night King serene in private conviction. Tears froze on his lashes. A piercing call rang out. Arya again, sprinting along balustrade above, another obsidian knife drawn. She leapt, launching herself into free space between tower and plaza, falling toward the Ice Queen's unguarded back. At the same breath, Brienne found a final reservoir of will. She drove Bright Roar into the largest fracture, screaming, channeling every vow, every oath. The sword ignited, crimson core exploding outward. The dome shattered inward, a billion shards fontaining like powdered diamond. The Night King turned too late. Shards sliced but did not wound him. Instead they provided area cover in cascade. Jaime lurched forward, dragging broken hand, scooping snow-damp spear shaft. He broke into run, reckless, toward the breach. Cersei sensed the impending confluence. Arya descending, Jaime charging, Brienne advancing with sword aflame, Daenerys lunging with final scream of Dracarys. She spared one heartbeat's choice. Within her an echo of Maggie, the frog's prophecy rattled, younger queen, Valonqar, daughter tight. She saw paths unfold fractal, slay fire, rule winter, spare brother, fracture fate, kill brother, end prophecy, kill herself, end all. The glacier of her will bent fractionally. She pivoted, blade sweeping half-circle. The arc caught Arya mid-flight, edge striking steel mail under wolf furs. The girl was flung sideways, tumbling, landing in crouch but weapon lost. Cersei completed circle toward Daenerys, but the delay allowed Drogon to lurch forward, jaws gaping. A torrent of flame poured, brighter than any yet loosed this night. It struck Cersei full on. The plaza filled with roaring furnace. Jaime screamed, rushing through curtain of steam, expecting to find Ash. Instead, he found her standing, sword planted, flames swirling around invisible sheath inches from skin. Auroras flared, blues and greens repelling reds and golds. She was living nexus of warring elements. She looked at Jaime through haze with eyes both lovers and strangers. He crossed the short distance, ignoring blistering heat. He reached for her, golden hand broken, flesh hand outstretched. For an instant, she let the aura drop. Heat-scorched ice, steam blowing outward. Their fingers touched. Love, regret, fear, ambition. Every mortal coil. They passed in one pulse. Then the Night King's shadow fell between them. For all his stoic silence, his gesture was decisive. He drove an ice blade through Jaime's back, tip erupting from sternum. The Kingslayer gasped, spattering blood on Sister's cheek. Brienne cried out, charging, too late. Cersei's scream shattered every icicle in 10 leagues. The blade of her sword flared white, cut through steam, severing the arm of the Night King at elbow. His limb fell, still clutching weapon buried in Jaime's heart. Blue fire poured from stump. He recoiled a pace. Jaime sagged forward into Cersei's arms. She caught him, ice softening where it met his failing warmth. His eyes searched hers, amazed, pained. He whispered her name as breath turned to mist. She felt his heartbeat slower, then stop. Silence deeper than snowfall descended over Plaza. Drogon's flame guttered. Daenerys sank to knees, exhausted. Viserion circled overhead, uncertain without Master's full command. Brienne stood in shock. Grey Worm steadied unsullied line. Arya, breath misting, watched with narrowed eyes. The Night King retrieved his severed arm. Frost stitched bone and ice together in moments. He regarded Cersei cradling dead brother. Blue gaze flicked to the wound in her side, where flame had scorched gown, exposing ribs of half-frozen flesh. He extended a hand in silent invitation. Relinquish grief. Return to purpose. Cersei rose slowly, Jaime's body limp. She laid him upon snow, smoothing hair from blood-damp brow. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. Her lips left imprint of snowflake. Then she stood, facing Night King, sword in relaxed grip. Daenerys watched, uncertain whether to seize moment or hold. She sensed something shifting beyond strategy. Wind hushed, snow paused in midair as if court awaited pronouncement. Cersei looked from Night King to Daenerys, to Arya, Brienne, Grey Worm, wounded Drogon. She saw a tapestry of mortals, fire hearts, beating, failing, loving, hating, so fragile. She recalled her children again, felt the ache unsoftened by ice. Prophecy said Valonqar would choke her life. It had. Jaime, little brother in minutes, had died in arms. A tear formed, froze on cheek, fell tinkling to ground. She raised dragonglass sword and drove tip into plaza stones. Frost fissures snaked outward, but she released hilt, let blade stand upright, abandon. She stepped toward the Night King, then past him. Her gown trailed roses that wilted under returning warmth. Aurora faded. She reached Drogon's head, laid a crystalline palm upon scale. The beast shuddered but did not recoil. The Night King watched, eyes narrowing. He extended both arms in command. Viserion shrieked, diving, frost flame gouting. Cersei spun, lifted empty hands, catching the blast. It washed over her harmlessly. She spoke one word. Stop. And for the first time her voice carried heat. Viserion faltered mid-breath, confusion rippling along undead sinew. The Night King advanced 2 paces. Skepticism or displeasure. Cersei raised palm. The fractal star on her breast pulsed, half blue, half glowing ember. A fissure of light appeared between eyes, down the bridge of nose. A crack of thawing ice. She spoke again, louder. Voice containing echo of answered prophecy. Enough. Her aura flared, not aurora this time, but golden light mingling with frost. Sunrise and moonset in one breath. Ice lilies around feet withered, leaking water into snow. Color returned to strands of hair, not full Lannister gold, but pale wheat, as though frost melted yet memory of chill remained. The Night King halted. His head tilted fractionally. Blue flames in his eyes dimmed, then intensified. He raised his intact arm, clawed fingers opening as if to clasp her soul. Cersei stepped closer. She laid palm over Jaime's shield still on her shoulder, feeling warmth where terror flame had scorched earlier. She looked to Daenerys, voice calm. Fire and ice can end the world or mend it. Choose. Daenerys, knees in snow, met her gaze. Across battlefield, Arya lifted head. Brienne tightened grip. Grey Worm steadied line. Snow stirred again as wind regained breath. Viserion shrieked. Night King gestured. The undead dragon dived. This time Drogon rose to meet, despite wounds compelled by Ryder's silent plea. Fire and frost met mid-air in spear of swirling ash that rained over Plaza like stardust. Cersei raised both arms. The star at her chest flared, absorbing fall of ash, weaving it into cloak of ember-flecked ice. She turned once more to Night King and spoke final verdict. Winter may reign, but cannot love. I loved. I love still. Your throne is emptiness. Mine was built on fire of blood, and now, on frost of memory. I will not let you take what remains of either. And she shattered her own sword with a strike of fist. Dragon glass exploded into motes. Those motes spun around her, orbiting. She opened both hands. Shards flew like comets toward Night King, burying into chest, throat, eyes. He took a step back. Blue light leaking. The dragon glass hissed, battling ice. Viserion wheeled, shriek turning ragged. Drogon's flame found strength, ignited path along undead hide. Crevasses opened, light within flickering. The Night King roared. First sound ever uttered. It shook battlements. Snow collapsed from rooftops. Whites stumbled. He wrenched shards free, threw them aside. Frost healed wounds. He strode toward Cersei, murderous. She braced, then felt a hand press obsidian blade between ribs from behind. Arya's face at her ear. Not Cersei's spine, but Night King's flank. The little wolf had slipped behind him in instant of distraction. Blade plunged, Valyrian steel obsidian alloy forged in Winterfell's shattered courtyard. Blue fire burst from Night King's mouth. He seized Arya's wrist, but too late. Light crackled over his icy skin, fractures spreading in lattice. Cersei stepped forward, placed her palm on his chest beside the blade. Warmth seeped from her unnatural, melting core. She whispered, "Remember, love." Or no, nothing. The Night King's eyes flared once more, then cracked like broken sapphires. He exploded into a cyclone of ice dust. Arya stumbled back. Cersei staggered, knees buckling. She collapsed beside Jaime's body. Silence enveloped Plaza. Whites collapsed, inert. Viserion's shriek ended in strangled hiss. The dragon crumbled mid-air, disintegrating into drifting snow. Drogon landed heavily, bloodied, but alive. Daenerys rose, limped to the fallen queen. Brienne sheathed bright roar, kneeling beside Jaime, closing golden-rimmed eyes. Grey Worm lowered spear, breath pluming. Sandor slumped against wall, watching fire fade on ruined ships. Cersei's gaze took them all in, hazy. Frost lingered on lashes but melted in warm tears that finally flowed unimpeded. She looked at Daenerys. "Take the throne. Break the wheel. Burn my sins if you must." Daenerys knelt. "We will rebuild. Together, if you live." Cersei's smile cracked. "Mortal, weary. I am already gone where he cannot reach. Keep Jaime's memory. Tell them he died, defending the living." Daenerys reached to staunch bleeding at Cersei's side, but ice had turned to glass brittle. Beneath, flesh gave way. In final breath, Cersei turned to Jaime, pressed forehead to his. A whisper escaped like snow on wind. "We were the world's flame, you and I. Now let it thaw." Her body shimmered, ice softening into translucent crystal, then collapsing in glittering rain that dusted his cooling form. Dawn's first true light crested over Dragonstone horizon, rays touching Red Keep's ragged towers. Snow still lay thick, but a faint drip-drip began from icicles at every eave. A single drop struck the hilt of Brightroar, hissing. Another landed on the cheek of Arya Stark, and she smiled, small, fierce. In the harbor, fires from Euron's fleet crackled, but began to die as sea spray hissed against hulls. Small folk emerged from doorways, blinking, shivering, alive. On the plaza, Daenerys helped Brienne lift Jaime's body. Together they bore him toward the Sept de Glace, ice petals blooming into crocus where sunlight struck. Grey Worm rallied healers for dragon and men alike. Sandor found Arya's knife, returned it with grunt of respect. High above, the auroras faded, leaving blue morning sky streaked with pink. And on broken balcony, where once she ruled with lion's pride, nothing remained of the Ice Queen but melting frost, a single ruby tear, and the memory of winter choosing, at last, to relinquish its bride. Dawn smoldered into full day, a pale sun prying through ragged veils of cloud, gilding King's Landing in hesitant warmth. The city exhaled steam where the snowpack surrendered. Gutters ran with sluggish rivulets that smoked as they met stones still colder than iron. Broken scorpions lay half-submerged at the ramparts, their bronze arms rimed in frost that crackled and fell away in slow cascades whenever sunlight kissed the metal. The scent of wildfire, even dulled by collapse, hung in every thoroughfare, an acrid ghost threading through the sweeter smell of thawing loam. Yet for the first time in memory, no new screams rose, no new horn calls shattered the fragile hush. The battle had ended, though no one dared decide whether victory belonged to the living or simply to the hour. In the courtyard before Maegor's holdfast, the survivors worked in near silence, as if louder speech might reawaken whatever force had frozen the world by night. Brienne of Tarth knelt beside Jaime's shrouded form, linen stripped from a royal banner, now wrapped snug as any pauper's winding sheet. She had sewn it herself with numb fingers, silver needle flashing between threads of red and gold that chafed from the damp. Each stitch felt like another anchor dropped to keep her heart from drifting into grief's wide ocean. She had bound the sheet across his broad shoulders, over the golden stump, around hips that once cut so fine a figure, and under the heels where old tourney scars hid. When she finished, she pressed her brow to the linen a long moment, muttered a prayer the Septons of Tarth taught children against the sea's appetite, then rose on unsteady legs. Davos Seaworth waited nearby, hood thrown back, the last of his hair wet with melting frost. He touched her elbow, gentling the motion. "He was a lion until his last breath, my lady." "You gave him a knight's passing." Brienne managed a tight nod. "It is not for me to decide lion from knight, but I will see him buried whole." "You shall." Davos' single good hand tightened. "And, not to hurry sorrow, but we must clear walkways for the wounded. There will be more dead at uncovered by noon." Her eyes followed his gesture. Snowdrifts in the courtyard shifted where trapped soldiers, still living, dug themselves free. Under each crust lay bodies of unsullied, of whites now inert, of small folk who had fled through the wrong gate. The glow of wildfire had blackened the stones, leaving starbursts of obsidian glass that crunched beneath boots like brittle sugar. Steam curled from the glass and from the bent iron of the frost-shattered gate, mingling into low fog around their calves. Grey Worm directed triage crews with voice gone hoarse. The commander moved through ranks of the wounded, binding stumps with strips torn from his own cloak, whispering Skahazadon lullabies to men who would never see the summer sea. His eyes sought Daenerys again and again, but the queen had not descended since the Night King's disintegration. She lingered on the tower balcony, where shattered icicles glittered around her like wind-carved jewels. Her riding leathers were half-burnt, half-frozen, Patches of scaled black curled away to reveal raw pink skin where heat and cold had fought for purchase. Still, she stood upright, gaze fixed on the drifting ash above the river. In her right hand, she held a jagged sliver of Cersei's former sword, dragonglass fused with ice, now weeping beads of water that hissed when they slid to the carved stone rail. She turned the shard between finger and thumb, watching sunlight refract over runnels of captured aurora, listening to the faint music the melting made. "Your Grace." Arya's voice found her through the hush. Soft but strong. The younger woman approached without hurry, hair loose, cheeks ruddy from wind. She carried the Valyrian obsidian dagger still stained with blue embers, where it had pierced the Night King's heart. She paused an arm's length away, boots crunching fragments of ice that had once been a dome, a queen, a kingdom of despair. "They're waiting," Arya said. "For what?" Daenerys asked without tearing her eyes from the river. "Instruction. Hope. Maybe justice." Daenerys let out a slow breath that misted despite the growing warmth. "Justice." A smile ghosted, brittle. "The city is rubble. Half the small folk fled their homes only to freeze or burn on the roads. Jaime Lannister lies below, and the woman who killed children to hold a throne died, saving those children. Nay, she also killed plenty tonight." Arya's tone carried neither condemnation nor praise, only the blunt weight of witness. But she chose. Everyone does at the edge. Daenerys finally looked at the girl who had stabbed death itself, twice. "What would you have me say? That we crown a new queen and the song ends?" Arya shook her head. "The song never ends. You know that. But it can change tune." None. Down in the throne room, what walls remained of it, Qyburn's body lay frozen in a cage of his own splintered experiments. No one bothered to move him. The crows would finish what undead talons had begun. More pressing were the crates of dragon-glass spears left stacked behind the dais. Podrick Payne and a handful of battered gold cloaks dragged them into the Hall of Lamps, where braziers now flickered again after Grey Worm coaxed them alight with whale oil. The spears would serve no new war, but the glass could be chipped into knives, surgeon's blades, arrowheads. Podrick hefted one, testing balance, remembering how easily whites had burst beneath its kiss. Even victory needed tools. Outside the gates, Braun of the Blackwater crested the hill, astride a stolen piebald gelding, armor dented, cheeks chapped, eyes bright with the gleam of someone who had once more survived, contrary to all reasonable betting odds. He surveyed the city, white spires sagging, plumes of steam venting from every sewer grate, and spat. "Looks like winter took a shit on a bonfire," he muttered, wiping mouth with the back of a black-gloved hand. He tapped heels to gelding's flanks and descended toward the mud gate in search of either wine or an honest corpse with coin, still in purse. Whichever he found first would mark the day's fortune. Near the docks, the baby ice cathedral, Septiglass, stood half-melted, its spires shedding slivers of diamond-bright glass. Sunlight scattered through curved panes to throw patterns upon snow like hammered silver. Children of Flea Bottom, too young to know fear of old gods or new, dashed between falling prisms, gathering fragments into pockets, each flake a treasure beyond bread. Their mothers called warnings that sliced thin as gull screams, but the children laughed anyway. Ice that did not burn or bite was wonder. In a stable yard bending around the burnt keep's outer wall, Sandor Clegane sat on an overturned trough, water steaming around his boots. A hostler hacked apart frozen tack with a cleaver, cursing softly. Sandor nursed his own hands near the embers of a brazier he'd commandeered. One palm blistered anew where green fire had flared, the other raw from hauling casks. He ignored the hostler's mutters, staring instead at Viserion's remains beyond the rooftops, great arcs of rib ice listing over collapsed granaries. They looked like the ribs of a shipwrecked leviathan hoisted from some cosmic sea. The emptiness inside those bones matched something hollow in him. A dog growled at the entrance. Sandor tossed it a burnt strip of jerky. "Yep," he rasped. "We all gotta bury something." Afternoon ambled nearer. Sun climbed, clouds thinned. Snow sloughed from slate roofs, plummeting in wet thuds. Ravens, Living black ones, not pale whites, circled the rookery tower, arguing for perches pinned flat by previous night's gale. In their croaks, Daenerys heard old memories. The raven that had carried word of Viserys' death. The flock that abandoned Meereen when she chained Rhaegal. The single bird that once alighted on her palm outside Korth, as if to say home is whichever sky your wings survive. Today the birds quarreled over thaw and carrion and crumbs, tossed by trembling monks. Life again. She walked now among her people, no retinue but Arya at elbow out of stubborn loyalty, stepping over frost-blackened grass toward the Blackwater where Drogon dove. Steam spiraled from his nostrils each time he exhaled. The snow around him had melted into a broad ring of muddy slush. Unsullied ringed him at courteous distance, spears butt down, ready in case some final madness took the creature. But Drogon only shivered, wings twitching whenever memory of Frost Talon roused. Daenerys approached, laid her palm against burnt leather hide. The dragon's eye half opened, a molten gold orb vined by black flecks, gaze both exhausted and gentle. She whispered in Valyrian, voice low as lullaby, and he rumbled a reply. She breathed out the tension that had coiled through her since the first spear of ice nicked his wing. Flame flickered in the depth of his throat, enough to reassure but not threaten. She rested her forehead against his shoulder and let the world's noises fade. Soft steps crunched. Grey Worm stood a few yards behind, helm tucked under arm. "Your Grace," he said. "The wounded are housed in what remains of the Guildhall. The Maesters of the Rock have arrived with potions. They await your leave to move supplies inside the keep." "Menetets." "Give them the keys," Daenerys answered without lifting head. "No door stays shut to healing." "And the prisoners?" She turned. "Prisoners? Those who fought beneath the Night Queen after death left them. They yet breathe." Arya's brows rose. "Whites who lived." "Some," Grey Worm said. "When the Night King fell, many corpses lay still. But pockets of men, alive men, collapsed unconscious, shivering. They wake now. Some cannot recall the moment they turned. Others remember." He searched for words, failed. "We have 26. 2 were Lannister men, 1 a gold cloak, the rest small folk pressed into defense." Daenerys closed eyes briefly. "Feed them. Blankets. Soup. A septon if they wish. When they can walk, bring them before me. We will listen." Grey Worm nodded, though his jaw worked. He had lost 2 captains to those same blades hours earlier. Mercy is lighter on the tongue than on the heart. When he had gone, Arya spoke. "The Northern Lords will send ravens soon. They'll want answers. I will give them truth," Daenerys said. "The long night came south again, and we burned it away at terrible price." "Cersei burned herself away," Arya corrected softly. "You offered flame. Jaime, Brienne, and I offered steel. She unmade the Night King in the end." Daenerys dipped chin. "Then the songs must name her too." "She would have hated that," Arya admitted. A spark of iron-dry amusement. "She wanted only to be remembered as survivor. Then she has that as well." Daenerys looked toward the skyline. The Septica glass had sagged into skeletal arches, but one tower still stood, shards sparkling. Survival and sacrifice. "We will build a cairn over Jaime Lannister and leave hers beside him, ice and lion entwined." "Then Dan," Arya considered. "Sansa will honor that. She feared Cersei, hated her too, but she knows debts." The mention of Winterfell pinched Daenerys' chest. Jon's ghost lingered behind every northern vowel. She wondered if he still kept watch on shivering sea trade routes, or if he had flown south on some other dragon of rumor, only to arrive too late again. Better he remain ignorant until she could write words of hope instead of casualty counts. They climbed back toward the keep, past workers dragging hawsers around gargoyles, so melted stone could be levered from parapets before it dropped of its own accord. Podrick bowed as they passed, then resumed sorting arrowheads into baskets. Bronze for salvage, glass for sacred glimpses of last night's terror. Bronn leaned nearby, counting each recovered coin from a cracked strongbox, muttering half aloud, "King's Landing pays in stories today. Stories don't buy wine, but maybe they buy favors. When Daenerys entered the Hall of Lamps, torch flames wavered in flues, left gaping by frost. The great leaded windows were shattered pits, where once sunlight painted jewels on floor tiles. She paced to the dais, boots squelching in meltwater, and laid the ice-glass shard on a bench. It steamed like parchment, thrown on a brazier. Brienne waited, posture squared if weary. She had washed blood from cheeks, but left 2 crimson streaks above brow. A silent vigil band. Bright Roar stood propped against a column, blade sheathed now in cloth saturated with dragon's blood to keep steel warm. "My queen," she said. Daenerys shook her head gently. "Brienne, no point in titles while stones are still falling." "Oh, they still matter," Brienne answered. "A queen's word will mend feuds before they open like wounds." "Then speak plainly. What feud demands salve first?" "The Riverlands," Brienne said. "Edmure Tully holds River Run again under Stark banners. His ravens say the trident froze to the width of 10 men last night. Ferry tithes are gone, barges stuck. They'll lose barley if ice stands a fortnight. They need grain from the Reach, but the Roserad is blocked by drifts." Daenerys listened. Map lines drew themselves behind her eyes. Roads she marched, rivers crossed, castles burnt or spared. It felt an old dream now. If the long night lingers even death, each realm must share hearthfire. "Send riders to Highgarden, instruct Lady Garland to release winter stores. Promise double repayment in summer." Her mouth twitched. "If summer comes. Maester Malador claims the tilt of sun, suggests summer will come swift as balance," Brienne said. "He may be half drunk on relief, but the light feels clearer, warmer. De Lestjane, Entabati, Jiwanda. Hello." Arya, leaning against a cracked frieze, added, "Winterfell's fields were seeding before I rode south. If this frost starts north again, we'll be ready." Daenerys exhaled. "Then the wheel turns. And here," she gestured to crumbling vault, "we sit among ruin. You sit among survivors." Brienne's tone steadied like steel set on anvil. "And survivors rebuild. Your dragon can fire kilns. My sword arm can enforce peace. Arya can slip messages through lines where ravens won't pass. The city will not fall a third time." Daenerys reached out and clasped Brienne's wrist. "Then stay. Serve as Lord Commander of a new Queen's Guard, if that title fits one who bows only to duty." "Nandor." Brienne blinked at the offer. At the ruined throne behind, its blades half melted. She bowed low, then rose, voice hoarse. "I will guard the innocent, and the rest, if they strive for innocence." Footsteps echoed. Grey Worm returned with a line of prisoners, men swaddled in blankets, eyes hollow. Daenerys stepped down from dais. "Do you know who I am?" she asked the first. A gold cloak, no older than 20. Freckles lost beneath bruises. He tried to kneel, knees buckled. He looked around bewildered. "I remember waking in the cold," he choked. "Hands? Not mine." "No charges," Daenerys said to Grey Worm. "Send him to the city bakeries. They'll need arms to knead dough when ovens light again." One by one she questioned them, pronouncing labors in place of chains. Some wept relief, others fear. Arya watched faces, blade never far from hand. But she nodded each time. Fear and tears meant men still lived inside. Hours passed. The pale sun climbed its small arc, then dipped. Evening's gold slanted through broken window frames, touching puddles that had shrunk to damp stains. Smoke from scattered fires rose straight now, wind stilled. The day's quiet began fraying into common noise. Vendors hawking barley broth, children squabbling, hammers clanging on anvil as a smith tested whether the forge could be coaxed hotter than memory of ice. Life's music, returning note by note. On the terrace above the river, Daenerys stood again, this time watching pyres being built, where the Night King's cyclone had first touched stone. Jaime Lannister's bier occupied the center, a simple oaken board laid across marble slabs cracked by frost. Brienne insisted on no fanfare beyond a single white rose from the gardens of the rock. Plucked that morning, petals wilted, but fragrant. She set it atop his breast, over the lion sewn in thread of gold. To either side rested smaller biers, Quhono, unsullied captains, the children smothered in snowdrifts, even Qyburn's corpse, stripped of foul instruments, granted fire so disease would not spread. And at the very edge, apart yet not unloved, wood and kindling formed a delicate shape. The Ice Queen's cairn, empty of flesh. Instead, Brienne had placed within it the ruby tear Daenerys found where Cersei had dissolved. It flashed scarlet nestled in frost-wet cloth. Grey Worm brought a torch studded with dragonglass nubs. He held it to Daenerys. "If you will." She took it, heart hammering. Drogon's shadow loomed overhead, wings blocking waning light. She saw faces, Brienne's resolute sorrow, Arya's calm, Davos' tired hope, Podrick's wary curiosity, the half-hidden disdain and bronze grin softening to unexpected respect. She saw hundreds of small folk perched on balustrades, silent. She lifted the torch. "Last night," she began, words low but carried by hush. "Winter and fire warred in our streets. Lions and wolves, dragons and men, the butcher and the baker. Each bled. We did not choose the storm, but we chose one another inside it." She paused, letting eyes sweep across pyres. "Here lie those who chose until choice was taken, and those who chose after they were offered the world's ruin. We honor them alike. We burn their bodies so the cold cannot keep them. May their memories warm every hearth we rebuild." She knelt, set flame to kindling beneath Jaime. It caught slow, then flared bright, licking over linen. Brienne stepped beside, touched hilt of bright roar to wood. Sparks shot in orange spirals. Grey Worm lit the unsullied pyre, whispering syllables of Anieth lullabies. Arya used the Night King dagger, scraped along flint to loose tiny meteors into the tinder of the small folk bier. One by one fire bloomed, merging until terrace glowed like sunset reborn. Above, Drogon loosed a low keening croon, wings unfurling. A salute, older than Valyria. Flames painted his scales copper and wine. The people gasped. None ran. Terror had spent itself. Awe remained. Hours later, embers dwindled. Ash drifted on evening breeze that smelled faintly of salt and juniper. Daenerys stayed until the last spark died, then turned to new tasks. Her council convened in a half-ruined solar. Brienne, Davos, Arya, Grey Worm, Samwell Tarly arrived at dusk astride a wind-weary raven, face sunken but bright with urgency. Sam unrolled parchment. Old Town's bells rang noon with good tidings. No freeze reached them, but they track a column of frigid air retreating north by leagues each hour. Maester Ardeth writes, "We'll believe the polar vortex that birthed this dread has dispersed, perhaps forever." His quill shook, I think. "No, not at all." "Then the realm thaws," Davos said. Arya crossed arms. "North will send wheat. The Vale can spare oats." Brienne slid map weights into place. "The Crownlands must mend dikes. Half the Blackwater's levees cracked when it froze. We risk floods on the spring rush." Daenerys listened, weighing each word. Conversation unfurled, like weaving, threads of worry, hope, duty. At last she set palms flat on table. "We govern together until the spring harvest," she decreed. "When fields sprout and banners fly unfrayed, we will summon a great moot. Lords and small folk both. 3 from each city, 1 from each 100 hamlets. They shall decide who wears crowns, or whether crowns melt like snow. Until then, feed bellies, mend roofs, bury bones. Dragons will patrol roads against bandits. Swords stay sheathed, unless law faith." Silence greeted her, not of dissent but weight. Sam bowed first, quill held like scepter. Brienne followed. Grey Worm laid fist to heart. Davos sighed relief. Even Arya dipped her head, half nod, half smirk. Plans rolled throughout night. By moonrise outriders left on fresh horses, 1 to Tarth, 1 to Old Town, A third to River Run, bearing half-burned rose as sign of truce between wolf, dragon, and lion. Near dawn, Daenerys retreated to a narrow balcony of the Maiden Vault, needing solitude. She leaned on frost-scoured balustrade, staring north where auroras had danced. Stars winked shyly behind high haze. In her chest something uncoiled. Not triumph, not sorrow, but profound stillness. The war for Dawn had ended twice in her lifetime. She had walked through both flames and winter. What remained was quieter than song, louder than prophecy. People cutting stone, baking bread, laughing, cursing, sleeping. Living. Soft tread behind. Brienne stood, cloak about shoulders, face etched by firelight and grief, but eyes clear. "You should rest," she said. Daenerys smiled faintly. "Queens never rest." So the stories claim. Perhaps stories need amendment. Perhaps. Brienne looked out over river. Jaime once said he wanted his ashes scattered at sea. I will bring a portion home. To Casterly Rock if Garland allows. The rest. Daenerys nodded. Let the Blackwater carry them. He defended its banks twice. They shared silence. A gull cried, astonished by warm draft rising off water. Will you ride him again? Brienne asked after a time, gaze lifting to Drogon buoyed by unseen thermals above. Yes, Daenerys said. But not to conquer. To remind the sky it still belongs to wonder. Morning colored the horizon salmon and pearl. A bell rang from the harbor, not a warning but a shipmaster's call for dock hands. Nets must be repaired, holds scrubbed, lines cast. Somewhere, a babe cried welcome to daylight. Mothers chasing sleep swore softly. Soldiers laughed at jests only half funny in new sun. Life resumed. Daenerys let breath plume and fade. She straightened, brushed stray ash from sleeve, turned toward the heart of the battered keep. Lamplight slipped through halls like timid deer. She followed. Behind her Brienne paced, hand resting on Bright Roar's hilt, a silent promise that this fragile dawn would be guarded. And so it began. Not the reign of ice nor the tyranny of fire, but a brittle accord forged in the quiet after cataclysm. In streets where snow still lingered, children skated on puddles that would be mud by noon, and old women fetched water that tasted faintly of cold starlight. Ravens carried messages of seed and salt, of debts forgiven, of walls needing masons. No single soul ruled that morning. All souls did together, under a sky rinsed clean. Yet in a remote corridor of the crypts beneath the Red Keep, unnoticed for now, a thin line of frost slithered along mortar joints, whispering through dark like the last echo of a voice unwilling to die. It traced serpentine across stone, circling the empty niche where the dragonglass sword had once stood, and at the frost's edge, buried in rubble, one shard remained, a splinter no larger than a sewing pin, still pulsing with an almost inaudible hum. The heartbeat of winter, reduced but not erased, patient as the turning of seasons. Far above, unaware, Daenerys ordered the city's bells rung in thanksgiving, their bronze throats pealing through air warmed by dawn. The notes chased one another across tiled roofs, through melted courtyards, over rippling river, reaching even the shard's hiding place. It quivered, tiny, listening. The frost line paused, then retreated, seeping deeper into cracks where light could not pry. Because stories never end. They simply sleep, as winter does, waiting for the next breath of cold, the next shadow, the next choice. Yay. Afternoon slid toward evening, golden light stretching long across a city, still holding its breath, uncertain whether it dreamt the horrors of the night before. A hush hung over the charred and thawing sprawl. The fires were out, the dead were counted, and the living clung to their new, tentative peace as if it were a fragile egg cupped between shaking hands. In the hall of lamps, torches guttered as the air grew thicker with the mingled scents of tallow, boiled wine, and the faint, persistent perfume of old smoke. Grey Worm oversaw the final sweep, moving with a precision born of habit rather than hope. Every word he spoke a promise. Order would return step by step, if only for the time being. Daenerys stood at the high window, watching workers scrape broken glass and ash from the yard below. The ghost of the Red Keep's once glorious banners trailed from the parapets, shredded to ribbons by wind and battle. Down in the yard, small folk and unsullied alike toiled in silence. She saw Podrick Payne instructing a group of ragged orphans, showing them how to gather and sort what could be saved: iron nails, half-burnt timber, the undamaged bricks of ruined privies and ovens. She watched Arya moving among the crowd, wolf cloak swirling, eyes taking in every face. The sight brought a pang, a memory of her own youth in another land, alone and unseen, her purpose sharp as a drawn blade. The bells had rung all day, their peals softening with each pass of the sun. Now, as dusk painted the river in bruised purples, a new sound rose over the city, the slow toll of the great bell at the Sept de Baelor, once toppled and now righted, its bell mouth pointing toward the river. The sound drew survivors from their work and the wounded from their beds, everyone listening, each in their own way asking what the future would bring. Daenerys touched her cheek where the ice had kissed her during battle, the faintest line of a scar lingering, a memory pressed into flesh. Her hand was steady as she lowered it to her side. Her hair, once silver and loose, was now bound in a warrior's braid streaked with soot and snow. She turned away from the window to face her council, gathered at the battered table where the small council had met so many times before. The wood now blackened, the chairs mismatched from kitchens and ruined parlors. Brienne stood tall and armored, the white rose of Tarth pinned to her surcoat. Davos sat nearby, fingers steepled, eyes rimmed red. Samwell Tarly unrolled new maps on the table, his hands trembling but determined. Arya leaned in the shadows by the door, daggers spinning between her fingers. Grey Worm stood at attention, unsullied stoicism now tinged by a new patience, as if loss had opened a space in him where mercy could be planted. Daenerys' voice cut the hush. The dead are burned, the living are hungry, the city is wounded. We will not survive winter, what remains of it, unless we stand as one. We are not king nor queen, not conqueror nor rebel, not north nor south. We are what is left. Davos spoke, the rasp of salt in his voice. We have food for a fortnight, no more. Most of it's barley from the city stores and some salted fish from the Blackwater. The river's running again, but half the fishermen are dead. If we don't open trade with the Reach soon, we'll have riots come next moon. Now, Brienne's eyes flickered with the worry she never voiced. Highgarden sent word at dawn. Their stores are low, but Lady Garland promises oats and beans as soon as the road's clear. Sam pointed at the map. If the maesters are right, the cold's breaking in the north faster than here. The long lake is thawing. That means the Vale's passes might open by week's end, if we can get word to Sansa. Manzraher. Arya's dagger stilled. She'll send food, and men too if we need them. The north owes the realm a debt, and Sansa pays hers. But the Riverlands are another matter. Lord Edmure is cautious. He lost half his levy at the Trident when the river froze. He fears the dead might rise again. Grey Worm's face was impassive, but his hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. We killed the Night King and his queen. The dead do not rise now. Brienne glanced at the melted cairn on the terrace. So we hope. Davos cleared his throat, breaking the tension. What of the Iron Islands? I saw Euron's ships burn. But there were other sails in the haze. Some may have fled before the fire. Arya's voice was cold. If they come raiding now, they'll find a city with nothing left to steal but sorrow. Daenerys said nothing, but her eyes swept the faces at the table. Each of them bore wounds that would never heal. Brienne's grief for Jaime, Sam's haunted gaze after seeing the Night King fall, Arya's hard-won calm, Grey Worm's quiet mourning for lost brothers. She saw herself in them, felt the same raw ache. She drew breath. No one rules alone. Not anymore. You will speak for the city, Brienne. Davos for the river folk and dock workers. Arya for the North and the Forgotten. Grey Worm for the unsullied and the free folk. Sam, what must be remembered? If you see injustice, name it. If you see hope, spread it. Let this council be our promise. They looked to her, surprised and uncertain. Brienne spoke first. her words slow, deliberate. "And you, Daenerys, what would you be?" She considered. The answer had changed, somewhere in the long cold night. "I will be the fire that warms, not the fire that burns. If I must lead, let it be by example. Not by crown, but by deed." Davos smiled, thin but honest. "That's a queen then, the sort we need," Sam added softly. "A song of ice and fire written with kindness, not vengeance." Night crept in, cool and gentle, and the city was left to its new ritual. Bells tolled the hours as bakers stoked their ovens and fishwives called out the last of the day's catch. The Unsullied patrolled the walls with torches, spears at the ready but lowered. Small folk gathered in the remnants of the market squares, sharing bread and stories. In the Red Keep, survivors slept in clusters for warmth, too tired to fear what the next day might bring. Arya moved through the city after dark, as was her way. She walked the narrow lanes where winter's shadow had passed thickest, her eyes marking every face, every open window, every lantern flickering behind hastily patched shutters. She passed a group of children huddled around a brazier, singing a song of the wolf and the lion, the words jumbled but the melody brave. She passed a woman with silver in her hair, tending the wounded by lamplight in the shell of a once grand set. She heard laughter, soft, careful, but real, where two brothers squabbled over a crust of bread. Each was proof that the world, however battered, endured. She came at last to the courtyard where the cairns were cooling, embers still winking among the ash. Brienne was there, head bowed, whispering words to the night sky. Arya waited, silent as snow, until Brienne looked up. "I never thought I would mourn a Lannister," Brienne said. "But Jaime was more than his name in the end." Arya nodded. "He died for the living. That's more than most can say." Brienne offered a faint smile. "And Cersei? Will you mourn her too?" Arya considered, her gaze wandering to the empty cairn, the single ruby tear glinting atop it. "I don't know." She chose her end, but it was a different choice than any of us expected. Maybe that's worth a kind of respect. They stood together a while, the silence companionable. Above, the first stars pricked the sky, mirrored in the last puddles of meltwater below. Dawn found Daenerys pacing the Red Keep's highest terrace, Drogon coiled on the roof tiles beside her, a sentinel whose breath rose in plumes of gold and black. From here the city stretched out, its wounds visible and raw but healing. Here and there, smoke curled up from new forges. From the harbor, she could hear the creak and groan of ships being righted, sailors shouting to one another in half a dozen tongues. She laid a hand on Drogon's snout. "We will not fly today, old friend. The city needs to know we are not above them, that I walk where they walk, eat what they eat, shiver where they shiver." "It," Drogon huffed, a cloud of steam swirling around her. She pressed her forehead to his jaw, whispering in the old tongue words that were both a promise and a prayer. She left the terrace and descended into the city as the sun climbed, its light now more yellow than white, the sharp edge of winter blunted by the promise of spring. She walked without guards, only Arya shadowing her from a distance. She stopped at the market, shared a crust of bread with an old woman who had survived the burning of the Sept of Baelor. She knelt beside a boy whose arm was splinted with a strip of dragon glass, his eyes bright with curiosity and fear. "Will there be more monsters?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not if we help each other. Not if we remember." He grinned, showing a gap where a tooth had been lost to the cold. Word spread as she passed. "The Queen walks among us." Some bowed, others simply stared, but more than a few offered bread, or a ribbon, or a flower, plucked from the first thawed patch of earth. At the Guildhall, she found Sam among the scribes, already organizing lessons for children orphaned by war. He was gentle and sure, correcting a girl's pen stroke, encouraging a boy to sound out the name of his lost father. He looked up as she entered. "They learn fast," he said, pride and sadness tangled in his voice. "They will need to," Daenerys replied. "This city is theirs now." She left him and wandered down to the river, where Bronn was already at work with a crew of survivors, dredging for salvage. He winked as she passed. "My queen, if there's gold in these waters, I'll find it. And if not, well, there's always the next honest trade." She smiled and kept walking. Near the shore, Grey Worm drilled new recruits, men and women both, their faces drawn but determined. He called commands in Valyrian and Westerosi, every word a bridge between old loyalties and new duties. She watched him a moment, knowing the pain behind his discipline, the wounds that would never show. As dusk approached, the council gathered again in the Hall of Lamps, each bringing news from their day's work. Arya spoke of gangs turned to honest labor, of food shared, of an absence of knives in the alleys. Brienne reported on the walls. New stones set, old ones repurposed, the city's shape shifting like a living thing. Davos brought word from the river. 2 barges had arrived, one with salt cod, one with casks of reach grain. Sam reported the school's first class, a dozen children learning to write their own names. Grey Worm spoke of discipline, of peace kept not by fear, but by routine, by presence. Daenerys listened, the pride and exhaustion in her heart braided together. "You have done what I could not alone. You have saved this city, not with dragons or swords, but with patience, with kindness, with hard work. If the world is to be remade, let it be so, not by fire, nor by ice, but by hands joined." Brienne lifted her cup. To the living. They all drank, each in their own way. That night Daenerys walked alone through the Red Keep, her steps slow, her thoughts circling the empty halls and silent chambers. She came at last to the room where Cersei had slept. The Queen's chambers, still hung with torn golden banners. The great mirror shattered. The bed a tangle of frozen and thawed silks. She stood at the threshold, uncertain. She entered, running her fingers along the edge of the hearth where the last embers glowed. She picked up a single playing card left on the table, its painted lion faded, but proud. She tucked it into her sleeve, a memory not of triumph, but of what had been lost. She knelt at the window, looking out at the city. The stars above seemed closer now, the night less forbidding. Below, the lights of 100 hearths flickered. She watched as a family crossed the square, hand in hand, their laughter rising to her like a song. She closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. Morning found her still at the window. She rose, feeling lighter, as if some weight had finally slipped from her shoulders. She went out onto the balcony, greeting the city as it woke. The days that followed brought steady change. Word reached Winterfell and the Eyrie, Sunspear and Old Town. The Queen had survived the long night and chosen peace. Ships brought food and tools. Masons and healers arrived to help rebuild. The rivers swelled with meltwater. The fields turned green. The sky filled with birds returning from the south. Brienne organized a Queen's Guard made of men and women both, their vows sworn not to a throne but to the people. Arya traveled north to Winterfell, carrying news and requests for help, but promised to return when the city needed her. Davos became harbor master, guiding ships safely through the shifting channels of the Blackwater. Sam opened a library in the Old Sept, teaching anyone who wished to learn. Grey Worm, scarred and proud, led the city watch, his command honored even by those who had once feared him. Daenerys ruled, but not as conqueror. She listened, judged, forgave. She spent her days walking among her people, her nights writing letters to the distant corners of the realm. She ate at their tables, shared their grief and their hopes, and never once sat upon the Iron Throne, now melted and recast into 1,000 small tools, plowshares, nails, spades, and swords for those who would defend, not destroy. Spring came early, the fields blooming with a riot of color. In the market square, children danced around a maypole, their laughter bright. Old wounds lingered, but the city healed, inch by inch. On the anniversary of the night King's Fall, a great feast was held in the yard where winter's grip had been strongest. Tables stretched from the gates to the river, laden with bread and cheese, fish and pies. Daenerys sat at the center, her council beside her, the people arrayed in a living tapestry all around. Brienne toasted Jaime and Cersei both, her voice strong. They died as they lived. Fierce, flawed, human. May we learn from their mistakes and their courage. Arya raised her cup to the future. May the wheel stay broken. Grey Worm saluted his Unsullied, and they responded with a cheer, the sound echoing off the new forged stones of the city walls. Davos told stories of the Narrow Sea, his voice warm with memory. Sam read the names of the lost, each answered by a bell's soft chime. Daenerys listened, and for the first time in many years, she felt peace settle within her. The future was unwritten, uncertain, but it belonged to the living. And far below, in the crypts where winter's last breath lingered, a tiny shard of ice still pulsed in the darkness, a faint, persistent heartbeat, waiting for another story, another time. But for now, the city dreamed in peace, and the night, when it fell, was gentle and kind. A.K. Rain came before the summer, gentle at first, a hush upon broken tile and battered stone, washing away soot and salt and the memory of burning. In the aftermath, the air was rich with the smell of thawed earth. The city's wounds rinsed clean beneath a sky limned in fragile gold. In that quiet, King's Landing found a rhythm again, not the drumbeat of armies or the panic of flight, but something halting, communal, raw, and alive. It was not peace as the old kings knew it, nor prosperity as the great houses had once measured, but the tenuous miracle of endurance. Beneath these restless clouds, life went on. The Red Keep was a hive of rebuilding. Its towers, half collapsed by dragonfire and ice, were being cleared stone by teams of carpenters, stonemasons, even small folk who had never before set foot within its walls. Brienne of Tarth oversaw the effort, tireless as a springtide, a beacon to any who flagged. Her armor, polished until it mirrored the sky, gleamed among the dust and grime. Each morning, before the crews arrived, she climbed to the shattered parapet, looked east to the dawn, and whispered her own prayers to the fallen. When work began, she put aside memory and led by the strength of her hands, her orders crisp, her encouragements rare but golden. In the ruined throne room, a new council met each day in the lingering shadow of melted swords and broken grandeur. The dais was gone, the floor torn and pitted, the walls webbed by cracks where frost and fire had fought. Here, Daenerys Targaryen gathered her people, counselors and tradesfolk, city guards and healers, scholars and merchants. The War Council had become a people's assembly, its seats open to any who wished to speak. Davos presided as voice of reason, his words worn smooth by salt and survival. 3 bridges stand, he said one morning, a chalked map unrolled on the table before him. One at the fish market, one at the Dragon Gate, and one by the blacksmith's row. We've crews at all 3. But the flood 2 nights past nearly swept the footings from under us. We'll need stone from the Stormlands, Brienne replied, gaze sharp as a spear. Their quarries stand untouched, and Lord Garland's last letter promised workers in carts within the fortnight. Arya returned from her first ride north and back, perched on a window ledge, wolf cloak slung over one shoulder, eyes restless but alert. Sansa sends wheat and barley, and there's a northern mason named Helm Wool, who knows how to set stones to resist both frost and fire. He'll bring his own men, so there's no need to pull more from the city's hand. Samwell Tarly, now a fixture at Daenerys' right, tapped at his ledger, cheeks flushed with earnestness. The Citadels agreed to lend 3 more healers. Old Town is still wary, but the maesters are men of learning before politics. We'll have their expertise for the wounds that fester, and for the children born thin from last winter's famine. Grey Worm, ever watchful, reported on the streets. Few riots now. Food lines are orderly. The City Watch, Unsullied and Gold Cloaks together, keep the peace. But I have seen men share bread who once shared knives. He looked to Daenerys. The city is afraid of new threats. They trust the dragon, but fear the shadow of the cold. Davos scratched his beard. Rumors move faster than ravens. Some say the Night King's soul haunts the crypts. Others speak of pale children seen at the edge of the woods. Children lost in the fighting, most likely, Arya said. But I'll check it myself before dusk. Daenerys' gaze swept the table, searching faces. Her own bore the marks of struggle, a hairline scar along her jaw where Cersei's blade of ice had kissed her, a thinness at the cheekbones where hunger had become habit. Her eyes, though, were undiminished, clear and full of a wary, kindling hope. We cannot banish fear with swords, or comfort every loss with justice. We can only show by our actions that this city belongs to its people, not to conquerors or ghosts. We are all that remain if we persist. She stood, and the assembly rose with her. Let the bridges stand. Let the sick be healed. Let the children play in the streets. Let each day bring us closer to a city rebuilt by its own hands. And so it was. The days that followed were shaped by labor. Carpenters raised scaffolds against the skeletons of once proud towers. Masons fit new stone to old, mixing lime with ash to forge mortar as strong as memory. In the alleys, bakers distributed loaves of bread, thick with oats and honey, made from northern grain. At dusk, the bells rang again, no longer to warn of attack, but to mark the hour of shared meal and rest. Arya rode out each morning with a half-dozen scouts, unsullied, Riverlanders, and a pair of city boys as quick with a story as a knife. They scoured the woods and riverbanks, found lost children, uncovered caches of food buried before the siege. Once, they found a half-frozen girl tangled in reeds near the God's Eye. Her hair white as the Night Queen's and her eyes an impossible blue. Arya knelt, whispered a name she'd not used since childhood, Mercy, and the girl blinked, then smiled. She was brought to the city, given bread and a bed in the old sept, and her laughter, once it returned, was brighter than bells. In the library, Sam opened beneath the broken dome of the sept. Survivors gathered to learn. He taught boys to read, girls to cipher, men and women both to write their names for the first time. The older ones came too, sometimes to learn, sometimes just to sit in the hush among books. They whispered of ghosts, sometimes the ones in stories, sometimes the ones in their hearts. But in the warm light of the libraries, many lamps, the haunting softened into memory. Grey Worm drilled new watchmen every morning at the city's edge. These were not the Unsullied alone, nor the old gold cloaks, but a company drawn from every corner. Men who'd fought for Lannister and Stark, for Dragon and Lion, for no one but themselves. He taught discipline, but also mercy. Not how to rule by fear, but how to hold a city together in uneasy trust. Brienne walked the city walls at dawn, pausing to kneel at the places where children's shoes were sometimes left, little offerings to gods both old and new. She remembered the faces, Jaime, Cersei, Podrick, even Sandor Clegane, who had disappeared one night after the Great Pyre, leaving behind only his battered helm and a single line carved in the mud. I have no more battles. She hoped he had found a place in the world's quiet corners, a kind of peace. Bronn, now self-appointed master of coin, scoured the Blackwater for salvage. What gold he found he poured into the city's coffers. Let the lords pay taxes next year when the fields are fat, he told Daenerys with a sly smile. For now, every penny goes to bread, stone, and swords. By midsummer, the city had changed shape. Gone were the towering banners of house and war. In their place were painted flags of many colors, strung from window to window. Each child's handprint or hopeful symbol fluttering above the streets. The great square before the Red Keep was a garden now. Cabbages, beans, wildflowers planted in every patch of good earth. At the city gates, a new arch was raised, not of marble, but of wood carved with the names of all who had died defending the living north and south, noble and small folk alike. The Night of Remembrance became a ritual. Once a month, on the night when the moon was fullest, the people gathered in the square, each bearing a lantern. They spoke the names of the lost, and for each name, a lantern was set afloat upon the Blackwater. Some whispered Cersei's name, some Jaime's, some the names of whites who had turned and then died free. Others only mother or child or friend. The river shimmered with floating lights, and in their glow, sorrow became less sharp. A wound, not a fetter. Daenerys often stood at the river's edge on those nights, Arya at her side, Brienne and Grey Worm nearby. She did not always speak, but when she did, her words were simple. We remember, so we do not repeat. We mourn, so we can hope. This is our peace. Hard won, and never given. Not all was ease. There were still disputes, over bread, over land, over blame. The Reach Lords squabbled with the Riverlanders. Trade guilds jockeyed for advantage. The Ironborn sent word of a new prince claiming Salt Throne and threatening raids along the coast. Each time, Daenerys called council, not of lords alone, but of the people. Each time, she listened, and the city learned to listen with her. One dawn, a rider came from the north, banners flying. Sansa Stark herself, at the head of a train of wagons laden with seed grain, cloth, and salted meat. The city greeted her as a sister, and she was given a seat at the council table. She and Daenerys walked the rebuilt market together, speaking softly, two women who had carried more loss than most could bear, now leading not by right, but by choice. Arya lingered only days before riding west, seeking what else the world holds. She left her sword with Sam's students, her cloak with a crippled girl who wanted to be a knight, and her promise with Daenerys, "Call me if the shadows return." As summer deepened, King's Landing found a new strength. Grain stores filled, children's bellies rounded, laughter returned to taverns and halls. Brienne's Queensguard swore new oaths, to the people, not the crown. Davos and Sansa oversaw grain shipments, arguing amiably. Sam's library became a school, a court, a place of healing. Grey Worm, scarred but resolute, was honored by a festival held in his name. The day of the new dawn. On that day, Daenerys walked among the people unguarded, her silver hair bright in the sun. She joined a circle of children dancing around a new planted tree. A sapling grown from a seed sent by the children of a forest, blessed by maesters and old woods witches alike. She placed her hand to its slender trunk, closed her eyes, and in that moment, felt the city's heart beating around her. A rhythm older than war, deeper than fear. The city's festivals multiplied. Harvest feasts, river games, the night of lanterns. In the evenings, Daenerys dined with small folk and lords, sometimes in the Great Hall, sometimes in the open air. She shared bread with masons, sang with children, told stories of distant lands, and the dragons that once soared above them all. One night, as she walked the city walls, Brienne beside her, a wind from the north carried a faint chill. Daenerys paused, staring into the darkness beyond the city, the memory of frost rising unbidden. Brienne placed a hand on her shoulder. "The shadows come and go, your grace, but we remain." Daenerys nodded. "We do. And if the cold ever returns, we will stand together." And below, in the crypts, the last shard of the Night Queen's crown still pulsed, faint but persistent, its music slow and somber. A child, chasing a lost ball, stumbled upon it one day, picking it up with a laugh. The ice melted in her palm, leaving only a bead of water, cold, then gone. When she ran into the sunlight, she forgot the darkness behind, and the city above hummed with the songs of the living. As the years passed, the city changed, and the story of the long night became legend. The Red Keep stood rebuilt, its highest tower crowned not with banners of war, but with flowers. The library became a university. The gardens fed the city. The walls were painted each spring with scenes of courage and kindness. Daenerys grew older, her hair streaked with white, her eyes as bright as ever. She never married, though many asked. Her heart, some said, belonged to the city. Others whispered that her love was shared by those who worked beside her, day after day. She led by example, by presence, by listening. The realm, when it spoke of her, called her not Dragon Queen nor Conqueror, but simply Mother of the City. Brienne served as Lord Commander until her hair too grew silver. Sam became Grand Maester. Davos retired to the docks, telling tales to children. Grey Worm sailed at last for Neath, leaving the city in hands he trusted, a promise kept. And in the city's heart, on the night of remembrance each year, lanterns floated upon the black water, 1,000 lights for the dead, 1,000 hopes for the living. Daenerys stood with the people, Brienne at her side, and together they watched the river shine. Some said the world would end in fire, others in ice. But for a time, in that battered city on the edge of memory and hope, the world went on. Warm and bright, the past forgiven, the future waiting, and the present, at last, belonging to all. In Gehi. Summer's height arrived, its sunlight warm and insistent, striking every shattered corner of King's Landing and coaxing new life from the cracks. Where snow once lay thick and dead men marched, weeds and wildflowers now vied with new planted beans. The Red Keep's bones glimmered pale in the morning, less a fortress now than a monument to what survived ruin. The city never slept, and in these months it felt as if every soul from the Crownlands to the Reach had come to lend a hand, or simply to witness what grew from the ashes. Carpenters hammered from dawn to dusk, wood ringing out over the square. They built with care, but not the old grandeur. There were no new golden lions above lintels or stained glass dragons in windows. Only honest stone and simple beams, chosen for strength and comfort. Each morning, Brienne walked the rounds, armor gleaming even as sweat beaded on her brow, helping lift stones, laying a hand on a tired mason's shoulder, pausing to share a word or a smile. No queen's guard in memory had been so present, nor so beloved. Children followed her, weaving between her legs as she walked, delighted by her height and by the stories she told on warm nights beneath the new erected lanterns. Daenerys moved among the people as she had promised, bareheaded, her silver hair loose and shining in the sun, her hands calloused from honest labor. She helped mend fences, carried water, tended new crops on the hillside plots. In the markets, she tasted bread and cheese from the first post-winter harvests, laughing with millers and farmers, listening to stories of stubborn survival. She shared her table with the poorest and richest alike, and no one was turned away. She wore no crown, sat on no throne, but everyone called her queen. The council that had governed the city in winter grew with the season, its members changing as the city's needs changed. Davos remained master of ships and grain. Sansa sent letters each week, sometimes arriving herself with wagons of food, sometimes with news from the north. Samwell, now called the city's maester, opened classes to all who wished to learn. Reading, writing, ciphering, healing, the keeping of gardens and bees. The school flourished in the old sept, its nave filled with laughter and light, every pillar carved with the names of students who had survived the long night. Grey Worm's discipline kept peace, but his watchful eyes and quiet respect won hearts. He saw that the city's defenses were rebuilt, but his men also patrolled the markets and riverbanks, stepping in not with swords, but with open hands, settling disputes before they kindled into violence. His understanding of pain made him a fair judge, and he spent many evenings listening to confessions and hopes, especially from those who had been whites and found themselves living again. For some, the return to the world was a miracle. For others, a bewilderment that never quite lifted. Grey Worm found a way to hold them all, giving them work and welcome, never asking for gratitude. The Ironborn raids came, as the summer promised, but found a city ready and united. Brienne met their longships at the Blackwater with a fleet built by Davos, and crewed by a mix of riverfolk, reachmen, and former Lannister sailors who knew the river's every trick. The city's defenders fought with stubborn skill, refusing to yield, and when the Ironborn were driven off, Daenerys met the survivors at the gate, offering mercy to those who bent the knee, and sending the rest home with a warning. King's Landing would not forget who helped them rebuild, nor who came to steal from the hungry. Rumors of shadows in the crypts, of a lingering frost, or the restless dead, faded by high summer. Arya's scouts kept watch on the old tombs, reporting only rats and the dust of memory. The only cold was the memory of the Night Queen's final act, recounted each month at the Night of Remembrance. In the evenings, when the city was quiet and the air still, Daenerys would sometimes descend into the deepest cellars, laying a hand on the cool stone, whispering thanks to the shadows for their silence. Some said she prayed to the old gods, others to her lost children, and to those who had become more than enemies, or more than kin. Bronn grew rich in honest trade, turning salvage into coin and coin into food, grain, and bricks. He paid fair wages, gave sharp advice, And when the winter was a memory, he announced that anyone with the patience to build something lasting could have land outside the city walls. Shanty towns sprang up, growing first into villages, then into true towns, each with its own council and square, each a promise that the next winter would not find so many homeless. The markets boomed with trade from the Reach and Dorne, with spices from the east, and the first new wine since the burning of the vineyards. Street musicians played on every corner, and artists painted scenes of the city's resurrection. Children planting gardens atop ruined walls, masons carving new stones for the Red Keep, Daenerys standing among her people, Brienne leading the charge on the river, Sansa holding court in a new-built hall, Arya leaping rooftops, her cloak a shadow behind. Each mural became a point of pride, and each was signed by its makers, never lords, only names of the city, remembered now in color and light. Not all was easy. The wounds of war festered. There were hungry mouths still, and the scars of grief ran deep. Some nights, the city seemed to hold its breath, remembering fires and frost, counting the cost in lives and broken dreams. But when the sun rose and the bells rang out, hope returned, and the work resumed. As the season turned, a letter arrived from the Wall, now rebuilt by the free folk and Northmen working together. Jon Snow's hand was plain and strong. The Watch no longer took no one's sons by force. Volunteers came to learn, to serve, to witness the world beyond the world. Trade had begun with the Thens and Giants, and the North's wild places yielded knowledge of plants that healed, of secrets buried deep, of the wisdom of old magic, kept by the children of the forest. A promise was made. The long night would not return while people remembered and worked together, north and south, wildling and lord, each in their place. On the eve of the first harvest, the city held a great festival, lanterns strung from every eave and across every square. Daenerys walked at the head of the procession, Drogon a distant silhouette overhead, his shadow passing over the fields and lanes. She wore a garland of summer flowers, her dress plain linen, her feet bare on warm stones. The city's children ran before her, scattering petals and singing a new song. One that spoke not of war, but of beginnings, of memory and forgiveness, of the summer that had finally come. Sansa arrived at dusk with a train of wagons, Arya at her side, her face tanned and her eyes bright from her journey in the west. They embraced Daenerys in the open square, all formality set aside. Brienne knelt only for a moment, then rose, taking her place beside them. Samwell joined them, leading a chorus of students, girls and boys, young men and old women, singing a hymn of thanks in a dozen tongues. The feast that night lasted till dawn. Fish from the river, bread from the new milled flour, wine from the first casks of the season, cheese and honey, cherries and summer apples. The bells rang out, not for warning but for joy. Lanterns floated on the river, carrying wishes and prayers for the future. Daenerys watched each one glide downstream, her heart full, her losses softened by the sight of a city not only alive, but joyful. Afterward, she walked the walls with Arya, the two moving in silence beneath a sky alive with stars. "The world is wide," Arya said at last, her voice wistful, "but this feels like a home worth returning to." "It is your home," Daenerys replied, and Arya smiled, her eyes glinting with mischief and hope. In the years that followed, King's Landing was never what it had been. It was not the seat of unchallenged power, nor the jewel of the realm as lords once measured such things. But it became the heart of a new kind of kingdom, a city open to all, a refuge for those fleeing famine or war, a place where the old songs were sung but new stories were written every day. Brienne's Queensguard became a legend in their own time, sworn to the defense of the innocent, their ranks open to any who proved themselves worthy. The council grew, welcoming voices from the outer towns, from the Riverlands, from Dorne and even Bravos, each with their own ways and wisdom. Sam's library grew into a college, sending learned men and women out to teach across the realm. Grey Worm, after years of faithful service, left for Neath at last, his command entrusted to those who had served beside him and learned his ways. Daenerys with her city, her hair growing whiter, her face lined not with sorrow but with laughter and sun. She was known not as conqueror or dragon, but as the Queen of the Summer. She wrote letters to Jon at the Wall and to Sansa in Winterfell, and when she died at last, peaceful with Brienne and Arya at her side, the whole city mourned. Her body lay in state in the old sept, surrounded by flowers, and her ashes were scattered in the gardens, her memory living on in every stone and every smile. On the last day of her life, Daenerys stood once more on the ramparts, looking over her city, listening to the bells. Children played below. Farmers shouted their harvest tallies. Lovers walked the gardens, and on the breeze was the sound of distant laughter, the taste of salt and honey. A small boy climbed the steps beside her, offering a flower. "Is it true?" he asked. "That winter will never come again?" Daenerys knelt, pressing the blossom to her heart. "Winter always comes," she said, "but so does spring. And every spring is made by hands like yours." As the sun set, Brienne and Arya came to her side, and together they watched the city's lanterns shimmer on the river, bright and countless as the stars. They spoke softly, their words lost in the wind, but their hearts were full. Far below, in the crypts, the last ice had melted, leaving only water to seep away into the deep earth. Whatever power had lingered was gone, its story ended for now. Yet in every dark place, a child's lantern burned. And in every heart that had known sorrow, there flickered a stubborn flame, a memory, a hope, a promise, carried forward in stories and song, as long as the city stood. So ended the reign of the Ice Queen. And so began an age of living, slow and imperfect, but real. A kingdom without a single crown, bound not by iron or terror, but by the daily work of many hands, and the quiet enduring dream of peace. Autumn settled across the city in a hush of gold and crimson, softening the sun and crisping the nights. For the first time since anyone could remember, the change of season brought only the expected. Falling leaves, early morning fog, the rich scent of wet earth, not screams, not fires, not the brittle silence of snow and death. King's Landing was not only standing, it was thriving, filled with color and the tireless music of rebuilding. The city had become a tapestry of the living, stitched with loss, but radiant with hard-won hope. Each morning, Daenerys woke before dawn and walked the ramparts in silence, her hair now more white than silver, her steps slowed only a little by the years. She loved these quiet hours, when the whole city seemed to breathe in unison beneath a sky brushed with pale fire. She saw the harbor already alive with fishermen's lanterns, the fields to the north silvered with dew, the half-wild gardens clinging to every wall and square. The wounds of war had healed into stories, told over bread in the markets, whispered beside beds at night, woven into the city's rituals. At sunrise, she met with her council in the refitted Hall of Lamps. Brienne's armor shone beside her as always, though she too moved more slowly now, a cane resting at her knee, her eyes undimmed. Davos, white-bearded and wry, had yielded most of his duties to younger men, but sat in on every session, his memory as sharp as a fishmonger's blade. Samwell, rotund and gentle, presided over the city's schools, which now overflowed with children and adults both, scribes and scholars sharing benches with laborers, cooks, and even reformed thieves. Arya sent letters from across the narrow sea, each packed with tales and promises to return before winter's end. This council had grown over the years. The new faces around the table: Merchants' Guild, Guild of Healers, a gray-haired Braavosi spice trader, a Dothraki horsemaster who taught riding to city children, a former Ironborn raider turned carpenter, were proof of what the city had become. All were equal in this hall. Their voices weighed not by birth or blade, but by the truth and use of their words. On this autumn morning, the mood was brisk and busy. Sansa's envoys had arrived from Winterfell, bearing casks of preserved berries and strips of smoked venison, as well as a woven tapestry depicting the Night Queen and the last battle, threaded in blue and white, a reminder that even enemies could be remembered with dignity. The Reach had sent seed corn, Dornet's first citrus of the season, and from the wall itself came a letter in Jon's unmistakable hand, A treaty with the free folk renewed, a promise of peace across the snow. Sam spread his hands over the ledger, his voice rich with pride. The city's grown by 1/3 since spring. Every house built is full. Every granary stacked. The schools. Well, I've had to recruit 4 more teachers just for the numbers learning their letters. Naina. A ripple of pleased laughter circled the table. Brienne nodded. The watch has had no violence worse than a tavern scuffle in a month. The last batch of wildlings from north of the Neck have settled well. They built their own longhouses near the southern wall, as they did at home. The children are the quickest to pick up our tongue. Then, a woman in Healer's Blue added, "Fevers are down, and the harvest's given us enough honey for every apothecary to lay in syrups. I'd like more hands for the sick house, but we'll manage." Daenerys leaned back, her eyes full of the moment. "We are what we dreamt. Not one people, but many. Not ruled by fear, but by the promise that everyone can find a place." Davos, gruff but gentle, lifted his cup. "To the place we've made, then. May we hold it through every turn of season." Ninderwains. And so life moved, with the slow certainty of a city whose heart was steady and open. The city was full of color. Red and yellow squashes stacked in the squares. Banners sewn for the coming moon festival. New murals painted by children on every unclaimed wall. Bakers kneaded dough before dawn, their ovens spilling warm scents into alleys. Vintners pressed grapes brought down the river from Highgarden. Smiths mended plows and crafted clever toys for market days. Markets swelled with laughter and the clamor of trade, the clang of hammers, the patter of rain on tile. No part of King's Landing was unchanged. The septic glass had melted long ago, but its broken stones had been used to build a new library and a house for orphans. The ruins of the old Red Keep, half rebuilt, now hosted concerts and meetings and weddings. The Iron Throne was still gone, its melted swords recast into tools and bridges. But a simple wooden chair sat in the council chamber, used by any who needed it. Some called it the People's Throne. Everywhere, gardens grew, herbs and beans on every windowsill, peach and cherry saplings in every square, sunflowers nodding above the heads of playing children. The garden atop the city's highest tower was Daenerys' pride, a wild riot of roses, wild thyme, and golden daffodils, kept by her own hands and watered every day. She often sat here in the late afternoon, watching the river and the clouds, sometimes with Sam reading beside her, sometimes with Brienne in companionable silence, sometimes simply with the city's small folk, each invited to city's small folk, each invited to sit and rest, and speak of what the city needed. One late afternoon, a pair of young siblings, Jane and Garland, climbed the winding stair to the rooftop garden, having won a contest at school for their essay on kindness. Daenerys welcomed them warmly, set bread and fruit before them, and listened as they recited their prize-winning story about sharing a cloak with a lost stranger in the storm. She praised their words, pressed 2 silver pennies into their hands, and told them to plant a tree in the square. For every kindness grows another root in this city. Such was her way, and such became the city's way. When a distant cousin of the Lannisters tried to stir dissent, claiming a right to rule by blood and iron, he found no audience. The people's loyalty was not to a name or a promise of strength, but to the home they had made together, the bonds forged in cold and hunger and rebuilt in sunlight. He departed quietly, taking a place among the masons, and in time became known only for the clever arches he built. Autumn brought the harvest festival, now known as the Lantern Night, where each citizen carried a light through the city, naming aloud those they loved and those they missed. The river shone with 1,000 glimmering flames, as lanterns were set afloat, and songs rose from every bridge. Children dressed as wolves and dragons and lions and stags, their faces painted with flour and berry juice, their voices echoing into the starlit sky. Brienne presided over the ceremony of the Queen's Guard, now a tradition for all who wished to pledge their service, not to a throne, but to the city itself. She stood tall, her white cloak bright in the lantern light, her voice ringing clear as she welcomed men and women from every house and none, even a handful of free folk who had chosen to stay. Each swore to defend the innocent, to serve justice, to speak truth, and to honor peace. The words, once simple vows, had become the bones of a new order. Sam, his arms full of books, led a procession from the library to the market square, where students read poems and histories aloud. This festival was not only for remembrance, but for learning, new tales joining the old knowledge passed from lips and parchment to hearts and minds. In the kitchens and inns, food was prepared for all: stews thick with barley, pies bursting with autumn fruit, honey breads, and roasted chestnuts. No one went hungry, and every meal was shared. Daenerys walked from table to table, greeting each guest by name if she knew it, or asking for their story if she did not. She listened more than she spoke, remembering every tale, every request, every laughter, and every tear. Arya returned as the festival reached its peak. Her hair longer, a few scars new, her eyes full of the wide world. She embraced her sisters and old friends, told tales of distant places, and on the last night of the festival stood atop the market's dais to speak. She told the story of the Night Queen and the Ice King, of Cersei's choice, of fire and frost, of grief and forgiveness. She reminded the city that every shadow leaves room for light, if we let it. The crowd stood in hush, and then in thunderous applause. That night, Arya climbed the rooftop garden with Daenerys, Brienne, Sam, and the two children. They sat in a circle, passing around a jug of sweet cider, telling tales and dreams. Arya spoke of the free cities, of Bravos, where no one knelt, of the summer isles, where stories were sung, not written, of the far north, where magic stirred in the roots of the world and the auroras danced like living spirits. Daenerys listened, her heart full, her mind casting ahead to winters yet to come, springs yet unplanted. Before Arya left again, she pressed a knife into Jaime's hand, the child who had won the contest. "For kindness," she said. "To cut bread, not throats. But know, little wolf, how to use it if darkness returns." When the first frost touched the gardens, Sam's students wove thick covers for the roses and fruit trees. Fires burned in every home, but not for fear. Only for warmth, for gathering, for the comfort of being together. The city was ready, not only for the season, but for whatever the world might bring. One evening as winter drew near, Daenerys sat alone in the rooftop garden, her breath misting in the air, a blanket about her shoulders. She listened to the city's heartbeat: bells, distant laughter, the gentle hush of wind in the peach trees. She thought of Jon, Sansa, Arya, Brienne, Grey Worm, of every soul she had known and lost. She felt peace, not for what had passed, but for what endured. A sudden gust carried a single petal from the roses at her feet. She caught it in her hand, traced its veins with her thumb, and let it go again into the dark. "Every season, a promise," she whispered. "Every end, a beginning." In the streets below, a mother told her child a story of a night when death walked the city, and a queen stood with the dead, and chose mercy over power, love over vengeance. "Remember this," she said, tucking the child's blanket to her chin, "and you'll never be lost." Years went by. Daenerys aged as the city aged. Her hair white, her step slow, her face wreathed in lines of laughter and care. On the morning she died, every bell in the city rang. The people gathered in silence, filling every street and square. Her body was laid to rest in the garden atop the keep, her grave unmarked but always blooming. Each spring, the first rose opened at her head, and children came to scatter petals, whispering their dreams into the air. Brienne took up the council's chair. Arya returned and vanished as the winds called. Sam taught until his own hair was silver and then white. Jane, the girl who'd won the contest, became a counselor and storyteller, remembered not only for her knife, but for the wisdom and gentleness she sowed in every heart. No king or queen followed Daenerys, not in the old sense. The people's throne remained open, filled by those chosen for kindness, for fairness, for memory. The city thrived, sometimes troubled, always busy, full of hope. In the crypts beneath the keep, the last memory of winter, an old, melted shard of the Night Queen's crown, rested in darkness, cold and quiet, its story complete. But in every lantern that glowed, in every voice that sang at the night of remembrance, in every act of mercy, something of the long winter remained, not a shadow, but a lesson. And so King's Landing passed into legend as the city that rose from fire and frost. A city of many people, many dreams, many seasons. A city that belonged at last to all its children, and to all the tomorrows yet to come. The years unfurled as a tapestry, some threads bright with promise, others shadowed, but all woven by thousands of hands. In the city, reborn from ice and fire, the passage of time was measured not in wars, but in cycles of sowing and harvest, births and funerals, festivals and the hush of winter. Each season brought its own music. In spring, bells rang for planting. In summer, for trade and weddings. In autumn, for the harvest and the great lantern procession. In winter, for remembrance and for the quiet work of keeping hope's embers alight. King's Landing had become a city unrecognizable to the old lords who once claimed it. A city shaped by the scars of the past, but never bound by them. The Red Keep, once a fortress of terror and pride, had softened its edges. Ivy covered the lower walls, fruit trees rooted where towers had fallen, wildflowers spilled through the shattered tiles of old corridors. Children played beneath the stained glass windows of the old throne room, chasing dogs and laughter through sunbeams and dust. At the heart of the city, where the Iron Throne had stood, the people's chair now awaited whoever needed it. Its surface worn smooth by the touch of thousands. It was a city that remembered its dead not with statues or grand tombs, but with rituals that shaped each life. On the night of remembrance, when the first snow of winter fell, or sometimes rain if the gods were kind, the lanterns floated down the Blackwater like 1,000 small moons, each carrying a name and a wish. The names of the fallen, once whispered in fear or anger, were now spoken softly and with gratitude. For each had become a lesson. The price of cruelty, the cost of power, the beauty of mercy. Daenerys Targaryen's garden flourished above the keep. Over time, its riot of roses, beans, and wild thyme grew into a living monument, not to her rule, but to the transformation she had chosen. Each spring, the children of the city planted a new tree there, some from seeds sent by Jon at the wall, others from far-off Bravos or the Summer Isles. On quiet evenings, the elders gathered in the garden to tell stories to the young, passing on the wisdom hard-won in fire and frost. Jane, who had once received Arya's knife, became a force in the city's council. Her voice gentle but insistent, always turning argument to reason, and reason to action. She was neither noble nor famous, but her legacy would live in the thousands she mentored. Bakers and scribes, stonemasons and teachers, healers and the little ones who learned first to share, and then to lead. Sansa visited each year for the harvest, her arrival greeted with banners of white and blue, her hair silvered as well, her stride dignified, and each autumn she brought news of the north. The wall rebuilt not for war but as a watchtower and trade route, wildlings farming alongside stark bannermen, the old gods honored with feasts and song rather than blood. When Sansa and Daenerys walked the markets together, it was as sisters, laughing and arguing over honeycakes, trading stories of stubborn counselors and the foolishness of men. Samwell's library had become a sprawling academy, its chambers lined with maps and books from across the world. The old nave, roofed now in glass and timber, was a greenhouse for rare plants and a sanctuary for the lonely. Each year, Sam sent scribes and healers to far corners of Westeros, some to teach, some to learn, all to return with tales and skills. He died surrounded by students, his final words a simple plea: keep reading, keep questioning. There is always more to know. Davos lived to see his grandchildren fish the Blackwater. In his old age he wrote letters to Jon and Arya, to Sansa and Brienne, his shaky script full of pride and the memory of simpler days. His house by the docks was always open, its hearth never cold. Brienne, gray of hair but unbowed, was the city's steady guardian. When she finally laid aside her sword, she entrusted the Queen's Guard to a baker's daughter and a former Unsullied, saying only, "Serve as I did, and better." She spent her last years teaching children the ways of shield and honor, the value of silence and patience, the strength of gentleness. Her death was marked by a festival of peace. And in the square, children drew her likeness on flagstones in flour and blue chalk. Arya wandered farther than any. Some years she sent back only a scrap of song or a drawing of strange beasts. Other times, she would arrive without warning, sun-darkened and laughing, to sit by Daenerys' grave or join the night of remembrance. She brought stories of distant lands, of peace and peril, and always a promise that she would come home again. The city's heart, always restless, grew larger with each passing generation. New arrivals, Ironborn tired of raiding, Dornish merchants seeking cool air, free folk drawn by tales of gardens and justice, welcomed and given land, not as serfs, but as neighbors. Each house built was a promise, each school a bridge, each garden a prayer for plenty. The riverlands recovered, their fields green and well-tended, their songs echoing across the water. Dorne sent oranges, the Vale wheat, the North firs and tales of snow. Even the Reach, once haughty, sent their best vintners to teach the art of wine. Everywhere, new rituals bloomed. The lantern night grew brighter, its music more complex as each region contributed its own melody. In spring, the Day of the Living was held, a time for planting and for feasts shared with strangers. On the first snow, the city's orphans were given new boots, no child left cold. Each winter, a pageant was staged, recounting the legend of the Night Queen, the fire that melted the ice, and the city that chose mercy over fear. The actors were always children, the crowd, the whole city. Not all shadows were banished. Some winters brought illness or lean years, some summers brought tempers and strife. But the city remembered. When quarrels rose too high, elders called for peace with lanterns and song. When hunger threatened, every house opened its door. When fear whispered, the people walked the streets together, torches raised, their numbers turning darkness to safety. The people's chair was filled each year by a new leader, chosen not by blood, but by the counsel and the will of the people. Some years it was a healer, others a smith, once a girl barely 20 who had led the effort to rebuild the river docks after a flood. They wore no crown, held no scepter, and returned to their work when their year was done. Beneath the city, the crypts became a sanctuary for memory. There were no new kings buried there, but the names of those who gave most to the city, Brienne, Sam, Jean, Davos, and many more, were carved on the walls. Flowers grew even here, tended by children and the old candles always burning, the cold held at bay. One night, as winter began to settle in earnest, a storm rose from the sea, battering the harbor and flooding the lower streets. The city was ready. Boats ferried the stranded, bakers opened their ovens to all, and the council organized relief as the river rose. Lanterns floated even in the storm, their steady light guiding the lost and frightened. At dawn, when the storm passed, the city emerged from the water as from a baptism, cold but unbowed, more united than before. When at last, Arya returned for good, her hair streaked with gray, her stride as light as ever, she was greeted not as legend but as kin. She took no place on the council, instead walking the markets and docks, teaching children to listen as much as to speak, to trust, to dare. She found Jane, now gray herself, and the two sat for hours in the garden above the keep, sharing stories and laughter until the stars faded. Years passed, and Daenerys' garden became a place of pilgrimage. People came from across the world to sit beneath the trees, to plant seeds in her name, to leave notes and flowers, to sing, to remember. Each spring, when the first rose opened, the children of the city carried petals through the streets, scattering them over every threshold, a benediction of peace. It was a city where no one starved, where every voice could be heard, where every heart had a place. Children grew up learning the old tales but also writing new ones. Stories of mercy, of courage, of second chances. When they left to seek their fortunes, they carried with them the lessons of King's Landing. And in distant cities, new lantern nights began to appear, new gardens, new councils, echoes of what had been built in the ruins of the old world. And so King's Landing endured. Its towers were never the tallest, nor its walls the strongest. Its people bickered and loved, struggled and triumphed, suffered and forgave. The city's greatest treasure was not gold or power, but the web of kinship, memory, and trust that bound its people. The legend of the Ice Queen and her choice, of a city saved not by conquest, but by kindness, lived on in every hand joined across a table, every child's laughter on the breeze, every lantern floating down the river toward the dawn. In the quiet after the lanterns were set loose on the water, when the bells were still, the city dreamed, not of empire, but of belonging, not of kings, but of each other. The long night was gone, but its memory remained, a lesson and a promise, alive in the hearts of all who called the city home.